I knew before I opened the door. There was laughter, soft, intimate, familiar. The kind of laughter that didn't belong to guests or friends, but to lovers who'd long stopped caring who might walk in. The air smelled different too. Vanilla and ocean salt, not my perfume, hers. It was early evening, the kind of golden light that made the Pacific look like liquid glass. The beach house, our beach house, glowed like a postcard. We hadn't been here together in weeks. Work, he'd said. Too many clients. And yet, there he was. Andrew's shirt unbuttoned, wine glass in hand, leaning against the marble counter I had personally chosen, laughing with a woman wearing my robe. For a second, I just stood there, framed in the doorway, the ocean roaring behind me. He turned, eyes widening, the color draining from his face. "Elena, don't stop on my account," I said quietly. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. The girl Sophie froze, half covering herself, her face pale. Andrew tried to move toward me. "This isn't what it looks like," I laughed once, sharp, cutting through the air like glass. "Andrew, for once, let's not insult my intelligence. It's exactly what it looks like." He flinched. He'd never been afraid of me before. Shape inside, my pulse was a storm. But on the surface, I was still a mirror without a ripple. That's what he never understood. My silence was never weakness. It was calculation. I set my purse down, slowly, deliberately, beside his half-empty wine glass. "I see you found a use for the house," I said. "Good." It was starting to feel too clean. "Elena, please." "No, you don't get to narrate this one." His jaw tightened, the old arrogance returning. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. A word that men use when women stop pretending. I smiled, calm, almost amused. Overreacting would be throwing the glass at your head. "This," I said, picking up the wine and finishing it in one sip, "is underreacting." Shape he didn't know it yet, but this was the moment he lost everything. Not because he cheated, but because I'd known for 6 weeks, and I'd already turned the betrayal into a blueprint. As he stammered through excuses, I watched him, detached, clinical. His gestures, his tone, his desperation. He'd hidden Sophie in our beach house, a property registered in both our names. That was his first mistake. His second was assuming I hadn't noticed the missing funds, the off-book renovations, the wire transfers to her consulting firm. I'd spent the last month quietly building a case file thicker than his ego. Shape. When Sophie finally fled upstairs, clutching my robe, Andrew sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "Elena, we can fix this." I tilted my head. "We?" He looked up, panic flickering behind his charm. "I'll end it with her. I swear. Things got complicated." "Complicated," I repeated softly. Funny word for deliberate choices. He exhaled, defeated. "You've always been so damn cold." That one made me smile. "Cold? Andrew, I'm the woman who built your empire while you played genius. You mistook composure for emptiness." He didn't answer. He just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "You don't even care, do you?" he said. "Oh, I care," I said, picking up my purse again. "Just not about you anymore." Shape. As I left, I paused at the door. The ocean was darker now, waves curling like fists against the rocks. I turned to him and said the line that would later end up quoted in 1,000 comment sections after the film adaptation. "You should have picked a mistress who understood contracts." Then I closed the door behind me. Shape. The drive back to the city was long, the highway empty. The dashboard lights glowed faintly against the dark, the sound of the sea fading behind me. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in months. Revenge, I'd learned, isn't fire. It's architecture. You build it brick by brick, and when it's done, it doesn't burn. It stands. By the time I reached home, I had already sent Maya the final documents, the ones she'd been helping me draft quietly, under the name of Ward Legacy Holdings, LLC. The beach house, the accounts, the shell companies he'd hidden his infidelity behind, all soon to be mine. It was almost poetic. He'd hidden a woman in a house I now legally owned, and he had no idea that the deed he'd signed last week, for refinancing, I'd told him already bore the signature that would end his empire. Shape. I undressed slowly that night, standing before the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see the patient wife or the background partner. I saw the architect of consequence. I whispered to my reflection. This isn't heartbreak. This is reclamation. And for the first time in months, I slept not peacefully, but purposefully. The next morning, I didn't wake to heartbreak, I woke to purpose. Sunlight bled across the white curtains of my bedroom, painting thin gold lines on the sheets. The ocean was miles away now, but I could still smell it, the faint salt of humiliation. I got up slowly, every movement deliberate, as though the air itself needed to understand. I wasn't the same woman who'd walked into that beach house last night. I brewed coffee. Black. No sugar. Sweetness was for people who still believed in apologies. By 8, I was dressed in charcoal, gray sharp lines, soft fabric, the kind of armor men mistake for elegance. I slipped my phone into my bag and drove to Maya's office. Shape. Maya Cole's firm occupied the top floor of a minimalist building, downtown, glass, steel, silence. She'd designed it that way intentionally. Everything about her world said one thing: control. When I entered, she was already waiting, sitting behind her desk, reading a file that bore my initials. Elena, she said, standing. You look resolved. I am, I said, taking a seat. She slid the file toward me. Then it's time. Shape. We'd been preparing this for weeks. Not revenge reconstruction. I had come to her 2 months ago, when the inconsistencies in Andrew's accounts first appeared. At first, I'd wanted only to protect myself, separate my finances, quietly trace his offshore movements. But then came the emails, the reservations, the credit card statement from the Seaview Villas, the same beach property he'd claimed was under renovation. That was when my plan changed. Maya had listened carefully, never judging. She was clinical, methodical, the kind of woman men feared but never admitted to. Now she opened the file and began reviewing the final structure of what we'd built. Ward Legacy Holdings, LLC, she said. Fully registered under your maiden name, Elena Pierce. Controlled through 2 subsidiary entities, one in Delaware, one offshore through the Cayman intermediary. Everything tied back to Andrew's assets? I asked. Every penny, she said. Once the final transfer hits next week, the beach house, the San Diego property, and the 3 commercial investments will all be under the holding umbrella. He won't be able to touch them without your consent. I smiled faintly. And he still believes this is part of our refinancing portfolio. Maya returned the smile. Small, precise, lethal. He signed the transfer authorization himself. You're on every deed now. Shape. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. You know what I realized last night? What? That betrayal sounds a lot like the ocean. Loud, endless, but never permanent. Maya tilted her head. You went to the beach house? I walked in on them. Her expression didn't change. Maya wasn't one to gasp or moralize. She simply absorbed the information like a chess player, seeing a predictable move. Did you say anything? She asked. Enough. Good, she said. Because silence always makes men panic faster than anger. Shape. She opened another folder, documents stamped with thick blue seals. These are the last steps, she said. Once you sign these, it's irreversible. The deeds, the trusts, the power of attorney. You'll effectively own his assets, but he won't know it until it's too late. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than usual, like a weapon disguised as civility. As I signed page after page, I thought of the years I'd spent editing his speeches, smoothing his chaos, making him look smarter than he was. Andrew always said I had the perfect signature. Elegant, controlled, distinctive. Now it was his undoing. Maya slid the final page forward. The deed for the beach house, she said quietly. I paused, then looked up. Do you know the irony? What? He hid her there. He thought it was his sanctuary. He just didn't realize he was living in a property that was already legally mine. Maya's eyes gleamed. That's poetic justice, Elena. The kind the court doesn't need to witness. I signed the last document. The pen glided smoothly, black ink sealing the end of something much older than our marriage. Shape. When I finished, Maya gathered the papers neatly, aligning the edges with deliberate precision. It's done, she said. By Friday, the transfers will be processed. The deeds will bear your signature. Andrew won't even get an alert until it's already finalized. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not triumph, not relief, just clarity. Good, I said. Let him discover it in silence. Maya smiled faintly. You're colder than I thought. Not cold, I said softly. Focused. She leaned back in her chair. You know, Elena, most people want to burn it all down. You're the first I've seen who wants to own the ashes. I looked her in the eye. Because ownership is cleaner than chaos. Shape. When I left her office, the city felt sharper. The sun reflected off glass towers, traffic shimmered, and somewhere above it all, I felt detached, watching a world I no longer belonged to. I wasn't Andrew's wife anymore. I was his consequence. Shape that evening, he called. The screen flashed his name, Andrew Ward. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered calm, measured. Elena, thank God. Can we talk? You're already talking, I said. He sighed heavily. Please, don't do this. Don't throw everything away. I stared at the city lights outside my window. Andrew, I didn't throw anything away. I just rearranged the ownership. He hesitated. What's that supposed to mean? You'll figure it out soon enough, I said. Check your email tomorrow. There'll be a copy of the deed. The deed? Elena, what the hell did you? But I hung up before he could finish. I stood there for a long moment. The phone silent in my hand. My reflection staring back at me through the glass. And in that quiet reflection, I saw it again. That same calm, dangerous stillness that frightened him. Not rage, not grief. Just the satisfaction of someone who built the trap, walked him into it, and locked the door without ever raising her voice. Shape later, as I watched the tide on the evening news, I murmured to myself, he thought he'd buried me in the sand. He didn't realize I was the tide. Shape. The first crack appeared on Wednesday. I was at the gallery, overseeing a new exhibit, minimalist photography, all grayscale and silence, when my phone buzzed. Not from Andrew, from his accountant. Unknown number. But I recognized the voice instantly, a brittle mix of panic and politeness. Mrs. Ward. Sorry, Miss Pierce, he corrected quickly. I need to confirm a few details about the transfer. What transfer? I asked, voice flat, controlled. The holdings for Ward Legacy. Mr. Ward is concerned. He's saying he never authorized. He did, I said calmly. Last month. I have the signature on record. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. He mumbled something about verifying paperwork and hung up. I set my phone down on the gallery desk and looked at the photograph in front of me, a close-up of a cracked seashell. The caption beneath it read, "Pressure reveals the pattern." I smiled. Perfect timing. Shape by evening, Andrew had called 3 times. I let each one ring out. Then came the text messages. Andrew. What the hell did you do, Elena? Andrew. I just got off the phone with the bank. Half our assets are frozen. Andrew. You can't do this to me. I read each one like poetry, slow and deliberate. Then I typed my reply. Elena, I didn't do anything to you, Andrew. I just did what you taught me. I planned ahead. I hit send and turned off the phone. Shape. The next morning, Maya called. He's flailing, she said. Fired 2 lawyers already. Threatened to sue his own accountant. And apparently spent last night in the beach house again. I raised an eyebrow. With her? Without her, actually. Sophie's gone. Rumor is she ran off after the money stopped moving. I couldn't help a small laugh. Loyalty has a shorter lifespan than leverage. Maya chuckled softly. He's starting to realize just how airtight the contracts are. He'll try to claim fraud next, but don't worry, your documentation is bulletproof. Every transfer was voluntary. Every signature verified. He won't understand that until it's too late. That's the beauty of it, Maya said. Men like Andrew only believe in consequences they can see. Shape that afternoon, I drove to the coast. The beach stretched endless beneath a pale blue sky, the water cold and clear. The house stood at the edge, sleek, modern, immaculate, the kind of beauty that made people forget how much damage it could hide. I parked, stepped out, and walked across the sand, heels sinking slightly with each step. The door was unlocked, typical. He always believed locks were for other people. When I stepped inside, the scent hit me: salt, wine, perfume. But underneath it was something new: panic. He was standing in the living room, barefoot, holding a folder of papers, bank statements, legal printouts, his empire unraveling one document at a time. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. "You have some nerve showing up here." "This house is mine," I said simply. "The hell it is." I looked around. "Would you like me to show you the deed? Or would you prefer the court filing?" He slammed the folder down on the counter. "You forged something. You must have." "Careful," I said, voice quiet but sharp. "Accusing someone of forgery without evidence is defamation. And your lawyer, if you can still afford one, will tell you that." Shape. He stared at me, disbelief morphing into rage. "You think you can take everything from me?" "I didn't take anything," I said. "You gave it away. You just didn't read what you were signing. You tricked me." "I informed you," I corrected. "You just weren't listening." He took a step closer, eyes burning. "What do you want, Elena? Money? Revenge?" I tilted my head. "Neither. I want balance." He scoffed. "Balance? You humiliate me, steal my assets, and call it balance?" I smiled faintly. "You hid another woman in my house, Andrew. I'm just adjusting the math." He looked around, as if the walls might defend him. "This place was supposed to be ours," he said. "It was," I said softly. "Now it's a reminder." "Of what?" "That I was always the architect of our life, and you were just the tenant." He froze, the line hitting harder than I intended. It wasn't anger in his eyes now, it was fear. The realization that he'd underestimated me entirely. Shapey tried one last move, desperation disguised as arrogance. "You won't win in court," he said. "You think they'll side with you?" "Everything was in my name first. My money built this." "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag, "your company built it. And since your company is now under the Ward Legacy umbrella, which, as of last week, falls under my holding, that means—" I laid a single document on the table. His eyes scanned it, and I watched his face collapse. This can't be real." "It's real," I said. "And legal. And permanent." He looked up at me. The mask gone, the bravado gone, only disbelief left. "You really did it," he whispered. "Yes," I said, quietly, precisely, and without breaking a single law. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The ocean roared outside, waves crashing against the glass walls. Finally, I said, "You once told me I wasn't ruthless enough for business." He said nothing. I leaned closer. "Turns out, I just preferred elegance to aggression." Then I picked up the deed, slipped it back into my bag, and turned to leave. "Elena," he said, voice breaking, "what happens now?" I paused at the door. "You learn to live with what you built." Outside, the wind hit my face cold, sharp, cleansing. The sun was setting, streaking the sky in red and gold. I walked down the sand slowly, heels in hand, the tide lapping at my feet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was escaping something. I felt like I was returning to myself. Behind me, the house stood still, silent, beautiful, and entirely mine. And as the waves washed away the footprints around me, I whispered the line I'd been saving for this exact moment. "You hid your secret in the walls of my house. But you forgot I built the foundation." By Friday morning, the first headlines appeared. Nothing dramatic, no tabloid scandal, no gossip column frenzy. Just a discreet line on the business news ticker: Ward Developments faces legal audit following asset transfer dispute. It was almost poetic how quiet it began. No explosions, no shouting. Just the sound of reputation eroding like sand under a tide. I read the article from my office at the gallery, sipping espresso. Andrew's photo, confident, tailored, all false charm, sat beside a paragraph about financial irregularities, disputed ownership, and executive restructuring. He'd built his empire on perception, and perception was dissolving in real time. Maya called an hour later. "You've officially become the storm," she said, half smiling through the phone. "I didn't even lift a finger," I replied. "That's what makes it so satisfying," she said. "His investors are panicking. 2 of them pulled out of the marina project already. And the audit notice? That came from his own board. I swiveled my chair slowly, watching the skyline outside my window. How long before he realizes this isn't about money? Maya chuckled. He'll think it is until the last penny's gone. Only then will he understand it was about dignity. Shape that afternoon, I had lunch with Daniel Brooks, Andrew's former rival, and, ironically, the man Andrew had always feared most in the industry. Daniel was sharp, elegant, and knew how to weaponize silence even better than I did. He'd heard about the audit and wanted to discuss opportunities. We met at a small coastal restaurant, white tablecloths, panoramic view of the Pacific. "Elena," he said, greeting me with that knowing half-smile. "I had a feeling you were the one behind all this." I raised an eyebrow. "Behind what exactly?" He smirked. "Behind a fall that looks too clean to be accidental." I took a sip of wine. Maybe he just built something that couldn't stand on its own. Daniel leaned forward. "I'm not here to pry, but I am here to offer you something." I said nothing. He continued. "Ward Developments is vulnerable. Investors are restless. I have the means to absorb the company quietly, if you're interested in ensuring it ends up in better hands." "Better hands?" I repeated. "Competent ones," he said. "And yours, if you want them to be." Shape. The idea was tempting, poetic even. To not only reclaim what Andrew took from me, but to rebuild it into something legitimate, something lasting. But I wasn't ready to give him that satisfaction, even indirectly. "I appreciate it," I said, setting my glass down. "But I'm not in the business of salvaging men's mistakes." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're in the business of starting something new." He slid a card across the table. "Pierce and Amp, Brooks Development Partners." I looked at the name and felt something shift. The woman who'd been betrayed was gone. This one had plans. Shape. When I returned home that evening, my phone was flooded with missed calls. Andrew, his assistant, his lawyer, and one voice message. "Elena, please call me. You don't understand what you're doing. You're destroying everything. Not just me, the company, our reputation, our friends. I know I hurt you, but this is madness. Please, we can fix this." His voice cracked on the last sentence. It should have satisfied me. Instead, it just sounded tired. I deleted it. Shape. The next morning, I visited the beach house again. The air smelled of seaweed and storm. The sky was gray, heavy with rain. The house was empty now. The wine glasses gone. The silence familiar. I walked through each room slowly, barefoot this time, letting the chill of the marble floor ground me. Every surface, every wall carried memory, laughter, arguments, promises that never aged well. I paused at the window overlooking the ocean. The tide was high, waves colliding with the rocks like applause. "This house deserved better owners," I whispered. Then I picked up the deed from my bag, the official, notarized version, and placed it neatly in the center of the counter, right where I had once found them. Shape Maya joined me later that afternoon. She wore sunglasses and a half-smile that told me she already knew how this story ended. "Final transfer went through this morning," she said. "He's completely divested. Every legal document now bears your name. It's done." I nodded slowly. "And him?" "Spiraling," she said simply. "But he won't go public. He's too proud to admit the details. That's your final victory. He'll bury himself quietly to preserve the illusion of control." I looked around the house one last time. "What do you think I should do with it?" Maya shrugged. "Keep it, sell it, turn it into something new. Maybe a gallery by the sea?" I smiled faintly. "I was thinking something quieter. Maybe just peace." Shape. We walked down to the beach as the rain began to fall soft, mist-like cleansing. Maya pulled up her collar. "You know, Elena," she said, "I've seen dozens of revenge stories. They always end messy. But this was clean." I finished. "Too clean," she said, grinning. "You're dangerous." "Not dangerous," I said, watching the horizon. "Just patient." Shape that night, as I sat in the beach house alone, I found an old photo tucked behind a book on the shelf. Andrew and I younger, naive, sunburnt, happy. For a moment, I felt the faint ache of memory. Not longing, just recognition of what once was. I tore the photo cleanly down the middle. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. Then I opened the windows, letting the sea air rush in. The sound of waves filled the room, steady, eternal. And in that sound, I realized something. I wasn't just reclaiming a house or money. I was reclaiming narrative. For years, he'd told the story. Now, it was mine. Shape, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and whispered into the storm, "Revenge isn't destruction. It's authorship," the ocean answered with thunder. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt not fury, not triumph, but peace that tasted like closure. Shape. The first invitation came a week after the audit went public. Art and AMP. Architecture. Women reclaiming design and legacy. A panel. Of all things, a panel. Irony had a good sense of humor. I stared at the email for a long time before replying yes, not for validation, not even revenge, for visibility. Because silence had served its purpose. Now, it was time to speak. Shape. The auditorium downtown was all glass and gold, filled with polite applause and curated sincerity. I wore black again, clean lines, understated jewelry, the kind of power men still mistake for decorum. When the moderator introduced me, Elena Ward, curator, investor, and co-founder of Ward Developments, the audience murmured. Some recognized the name. Some remembered the scandal. I smiled, calm, measured. If Andrew was watching the live stream, I wanted him to see that smile. Shape. They asked about my journey, how I'd balanced art and business, how it felt to work beside a husband so driven. I could have told the truth right then, that I'd been the architect of everything he took credit for, but I chose elegance. I learned that vision and ego don't always share the same language, I said. Laughter rippled through the crowd, soft but knowing. The moderator leaned in. Would you say you were underestimated? I looked out at the sea of faces and said the line that would go viral the next morning. Being underestimated is a luxury, it lets you build in silence. Shape. Afterward, people crowded around. Editors, investors, old colleagues who'd once ignored my emails now spoke my name like currency. Daniel was there too, watching from the back. When the crowd thinned, he approached, hands in pockets. You stole the show, he said. I told the truth politely, I said. That's all it takes. He smiled. The world's finally realizing whose blueprints built his empire. I don't want credit, I said. Just correction. Shape. The next day, the interview headlines rolled out. Elena Ward reclaims her name and her narrative. Quiet power. The woman behind California's smartest real estate turnaround. Even Forbes ran a small feature. They framed me not as Andrew's wife, but as the strategist who turned private collapse into corporate rebirth. And somewhere in that redefinition, I stopped feeling like a woman avenging betrayal. I felt like an architect again this time, of reputation. Shape. Andrew, of course, tried to spin his own story. A statement leaked to the press. Irreconcilable differences. Amicable separation. It was laughable. There was nothing amicable about losing everything to a woman who never raised her voice. Maya sent me the draft of his settlement proposal. I read it once, smiled, and said, he's still bargaining with ghosts. Should I respond? She asked. No, I said. Let silence negotiate. Shape. The beach house became my studio. I repainted the walls white, opened the windows, and filled the rooms with sculptures made of reclaimed driftwood and glass. Each piece was imperfect, fractured, reassembled, deliberate. Visitors called it the Resonance House. They came to see the art, not realizing they were walking through a living metaphor. Every broken line was a story I'd refused to stay trapped in. Shape. One evening, Daniel visited again. He stood by the window, looking at the sea. You know, he said, you could build something bigger than both of you ever dreamed. Investors would follow you now. I watched the waves crash and recede. I'm done building empires, I said. I'm building permanence. He studied me for a moment. There's a difference? Empires require followers, I said. Permanence only requires truth. He smiled, quiet admiration in his eyes. You really have changed. No, I said softly. I just stopped apologizing for what I already was. Shape. That night, I scrolled through old photos on my laptop. Andrew and I at ribbon cuttings, charity galas, champagne toasts, all image, no substance. I deleted them one by one, not out of anger, out of clarity. In their place, I saved a new file. Resonance, house, exhibit, opening, doc/. A blueprint for the next chapter. Shape the exhibit opened in late spring. Critics called it a quiet rebellion in glass and form. The gallery filled with light and strangers and the low hum of awe. As I moved through the crowd, someone asked what inspired it. I said, forgiveness. They smiled, not realizing forgiveness was the sharpest revenge of all. Shape later, when the guests were gone and the house was still, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window again. The ocean glimmered beneath the moonlight, endless and indifferent. For the first time, I didn't see the past reflected there. I saw the horizon. I whispered, "You tried to bury me in property law, Andrew." But I turned the deed into my declaration. The sea answered with a wave against the rocks, steady, final, approving. Shape. When the story finally broke wide, I was having coffee by the window. The headline scrolled across the morning news like a slow confession. Ward developments under investigation for fraudulent disclosure. CEO resigns. No mention of me. Just the inevitable outcome of arrogance meeting accountability. I stirred my coffee slowly, the sound of the spoon against porcelain steady, and measured the rhythm of closure. Andrew's face flashed briefly on screen walking out of a courthouse, flanked by lawyers. The camera caught the exact moment he realized there was no path back. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just whispered, "There it is. Shape." The phone began buzzing almost immediately. Reporters, investors, former colleagues. Everyone suddenly remembered my number. I ignored them all, except one, Maya. Her voice was calm, as always, but there was a quiet satisfaction underneath. "Well," she said, "your ex-husband just became a case study in financial negligence. Congratulations." "Let's not call it that," I said. "It sounds celebratory." "You earned this ending," she said. "Most people just wish for karma. You engineered it." I smiled faintly. "Engineering is cleaner than wishing." She chuckled. "I'll drink to that." Shape. By afternoon, the news had gone global. The press used words like collapse, expose, audit failure, but they all danced around what really happened. A woman who refused to break quietly. Daniel called too. He didn't say "I told you so," though he easily could have. "You've officially outmaneuvered half of Silicon Beach," he said. "They're calling you the invisible architect." "Let them," I said. "Invisible is efficient." He laughed softly. "You're terrifying, Elena. Beautifully terrifying." "Terrifying," I said, "is just what confidence looks like when people aren't used to seeing it in women." Shape that evening, I drove back to the beach house. The same one where it had all begun, the laughter, the betrayal, the first spark of retribution. It looked different now. Not because the walls had changed, but because I had. The ocean was calmer that night. The waves slower, deliberate, as if matching my heartbeat. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of salt and new paint. On the counter sat a stack of documents. Final copies from Maya, the property, the trusts, the legal dissolution of Ward Developments. Every signature was mine. Every asset that once bore his name now existed under my quiet authority. Shape. I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it to the window, where moonlight spilled across the glass. For months, this had been the destination. The revenge, the reclamation, the poetic symmetry of taking back what was stolen. And yet, as I watched the tide roll in, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even triumphant. I was free. It was a strange feeling, light, disorienting, the kind that comes when you realize the war you were fighting ended long before you stopped swinging. Shape. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard the knock. It was soft at first, hesitant, then firmer. I turned, glass still in hand, and opened the door. Andrew. He looked older, thinner. The sharp edges of pride had been worn down by exhaustion. "Elena," he said quietly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, saying nothing. He entered slowly, looking around like a stranger. "This place feels different," he said. "It should," I said. "It finally belongs to someone honest." He winced but didn't argue. Shapey sank into the chair by the counter, rubbing his hands together. "I lost everything," he said. "They've frozen my accounts. The investors, they've all pulled out. I'm finished." I watched him for a long moment. The man who once thought he could orchestrate my silence was now begging for a version of mercy he'd never given. "I warned you," I said softly. "You mistook partnership for possession?" He looked up, eyes glassy. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it. "I did," I said. "For a while. But hate is a luxury for people who still care." He swallowed hard. "You planned this?" "Yes." "How long?" "Long enough to make sure it couldn't be undone." He nodded slowly, the words hitting like stones. "I didn't think you had it in you." "You never did," I said. "That was your first mistake." Shapey stood, pacing. "You've destroyed me, Elena." "No," I said calmly. "I dismantled what you built out of my work. You destroyed yourself." He turned toward me, voice rising. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said. "It makes me finished with you." Shape. For a moment, he looked like he might lash out. Then something in him broke instead. His shoulders slumped, his anger deflated. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "You start over," I said. "If you can." "And you?" "I already did." He nodded, slowly, then turned toward the door. As he stepped out into the night, he paused. "You win, Elena." I looked at him, my voice steady. "No, Andrew, I learned." He left without another word. Shape. After he was gone, I sat down at the same table where he'd once made promises he never meant to keep. The storm outside had faded to drizzle, the ocean breathing softly against the shore. I reached for the deed, the final symbol of everything he'd hidden, everything I'd reclaimed, and signed one last line at the bottom. Elena Pierce, sole owner. Then I whispered to the empty house, "You buried the truth under your name, but I built the future under mine." Shape later. As dawn broke, I walked barefoot across the sand. The horizon glowed pink and silver. The tide touched my ankles like a benediction. I realized then that revenge was never the real story. It was the scaffolding that allowed me to rebuild myself. The real victory wasn't the loss of his empire. It was the restoration of my voice. And as the first sunlight touched the water, I finally spoke the truth. I'd carried all along, not for him, not for the world, but for me. Justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It's a signature on a page. It's walking away without needing applause. I thought silence would follow victory. Instead, it was replaced by questions, emails from journalists, invitations to speak at women's leadership summits, producers wanting to tell my story. They called me everything: resilient, calculating, brilliant, ruthless. The words blurred together like static. Every headline reduced my life to a single phrase: wife turned mastermind. The woman who outsmarted her husband. It was strange being studied like a specimen. They wanted empowerment, not truth. They wanted the soundbite, not the silence between. Shape Maya called that morning, her voice full of quiet amusement. "You've gone viral," she said. "God help me," I muttered. She laughed. "You should see your face on business blogs." 5 lessons from the Elena Ward playbook. Lesson 1, I said. Never marry an ego. Lesson 2, hire a lawyer who doesn't flinch. She chuckled softly. "You've become a myth, Elena, and myths don't get to rest." "I didn't build this to be admired, Maya." "I know," she said gently. "You built it to be free. But freedom and fame are bad roommates." Shape. That afternoon, I received a call from the Chronicle. The journalist, Olivia Hart, was persistent but polite. She wanted an exclusive, not about scandal, she promised, about resilience. I hesitated, then agreed. One interview, one narrative, in my own words. We met at the beach house 2 days later. She arrived early, notebook, recorder, and the kind of curiosity that could slice steel. "I still can't believe I'm sitting here," she said. This house has been photographed, speculated about, mythologized. It's just a house, I said. The myth is optional. Shape. She smiled. Then, let's talk about the truth. She asked about Andrew, about betrayal, about the plan. I answered selectively, precisely. No names, no timelines, just principles. What made you do it? She asked finally. I didn't do it to him, I said. I did it for myself. She frowned slightly. Most people would want revenge. I looked at her recorder, the small red light blinking like a pulse. Revenge is loud, I said. What I wanted was restoration. He thought he owned the narrative. I just repossessed it. Shape, when the interview ran, it wasn't sensational. It was surgical. Her headline read, Elena Pierce on Power, Silence, and the Architecture of Justice. The article quoted one line that people wouldn't stop sharing. I didn't burn his empire. I redrafted the blueprint. It was everywhere within hours. Online, on podcasts, in boardrooms. Suddenly, every woman who had ever been underestimated found my name useful. Shape Daniel called that night. I read the article, he said. It's brilliant. I told the truth, I said. That's rare enough to feel revolutionary. He laughed softly. You know they're already offering book deals, right? One of my contacts at Orion Publishing said you could name your price. I don't want a book. Why not? Because stories like this end up being about men again. I'd rather build something that doesn't need to mention them. He was quiet for a moment. You always think like an architect. Structure before story, I said. Shape. Weeks passed. The noise faded slowly. And in its place came something unexpected. Invitations from women who wanted mentorship, CEOs, designers, students. They didn't want gossip, they wanted guidance. So I created something new. The Meridian Foundation. A quiet irony in name, since Andrew once named his yacht Meridian. But this one was different. A nonprofit incubator for women in business and art funding projects that blended strategy with creativity. Every application asked one question. What story are you building? Shape Maya helped me incorporate it, of course. You're turning revenge into infrastructure, she said. That's the only kind worth keeping, I replied. We launched with no fanfare, no press. Just a small announcement buried at the bottom of an art journal. But within a month, there were hundreds of applicants. I read every one. Some made me cry. Others made me furious, stories of women erased from their own work, talked over, replaced, rewritten. I approved nearly all of them, because I knew what it felt like to be rewritten by someone else's ego. Shape. One evening, while sorting through applications, I found a letter without a return address. It was handwritten, ink smudged in places. Elena, you don't know me, but I was one of his interns. I saw things the way he spoke to you, about you. The arrogance, the dismissal. I stayed quiet back then. I shouldn't have. But watching what you did gave me courage. I quit my job, started my own firm, and for the first time, I feel like I'm building something with my name on it. Thank you. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the top drawer of my desk right beside the original beach house deed. 2 different kinds of ownership, both earned. Shape. Months later, the Meridian Foundation hosted its first retreat on the same coastline where everything began. The women arrived with notebooks, laptops, ideas, and scars. As they worked, I walked along the sand, listening to their laughter rise above the wind. It struck me then how poetic it was that the same shore that once witnessed betrayal now echoed with possibility. For the first time in years, the sound of the sea didn't feel like memory. It felt like renewal. Shape. That night, standing by the water, I said it aloud, not to Andrew, not to the past, but to the horizon itself. The best revenge is authorship. And the waves, relentless and forgiving, replied in rhythm, as if the ocean itself had always known what I'd come here to learn. You can't control how people break you, but you can design how you rebuild. Shape. Success has a sound. It's quieter than people expect, like the low hum of distant applause you didn't ask for. The Meridian Foundation had been running for 8 months. Our name appeared in Forbes, then The Guardian, then a TED Talk someone quoted without permission. What began as a whisper of mentorship became a movement. I should have been proud. Instead, I felt the faint unease that comes when something sacred starts feeling public. The stories were real women, starting firms, launching galleries, designing startups. But with visibility came the vultures. Sponsors, influencers, opportunists. They wanted branding deals, interviews, Elena Award for Change campaigns. It was déjà vu, another empire being built around my name. And I had sworn never to let that happen again. Shape Maya noticed before I said anything. She always did. "You look restless," she said during one of our Friday dinners. "I'm cautious," I said. "That's different." She sipped her wine. "You're worried you're becoming him." I didn't answer, but the silence said enough. She set her glass down. "You're not Andrew, Elena. You built this out of empathy, not ego." "Empathy can be repackaged," I said quietly. "So can power." She smiled faintly. "And yet, you still showed up tonight, instead of hiding behind your foundation's PR team. That's the difference." Shape. A week later, Daniel called. He'd been consulting with some of our mentees, charming, professional, irritatingly perceptive. "Elena," he said, "you've created something remarkable. But if you don't structure the next phase properly, others will." "I know," I said. He hesitated. "I didn't call to criticize. I called because someone's trying to buy into your board." My stomach tightened. "Who?" he exhaled. "Andrew." I laughed once, not from humor but disbelief. "He's finished. What could he possibly offer?" "Connections," Daniel said. "And pity. He's playing the Reformation card. The man who learned his lesson angle." I closed my eyes, pressing 2 fingers to my temple. "Of course he is." Shape 2 days later, it was confirmed. Andrew Ward had filed an application to partner with the Meridian Foundation under a subsidiary trust. He was using new branding, softer language, calling himself a philanthropic investor for gender equity. The irony was almost operatic. The man who once mocked my idealism now wanted to monetize it. Maya called immediately. "Say the word," she said, "and I'll have his application shredded before sunrise." "No," I said slowly. "Let him come." She paused. "Come?" "I want him to walk through the front door and see what real power looks like." Shape. The board meeting was set for Monday. The conference room overlooked the same ocean, where everything had once fallen apart. Glass walls, long table, 12 seats, all filled by women I respected. When Andrew walked in, the air shifted. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but spiritually. He wore humility like an ill-fitting suit. "Elena?" he said quietly. "You look well." I gestured toward the empty chair. "Sit." The board members exchanged curious glances, but stayed silent. He began his pitch, a rehearsed apology disguised as a business proposal. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I want to make amends. To support the next generation of female leaders. To fund what I once failed to understand." It was almost convincing. Almost. When he finished, the room fell silent. I leaned forward, voice calm. "That's quite a transformation, Andrew. I didn't know guilt could be tax deductible." A few of the women hid smiles behind their hands. He swallowed hard. "This isn't about money. It's about growth." "Growth," I repeated softly. The word men use when they've run out of excuses. "Shape." He tried to hold my gaze. "You think I'm the same man? I think you're still performing repentance instead of practicing it." He said nothing. The silence stretched, tight as glass. Finally, I looked around the table. "Ladies, let's vote." The decision was unanimous. Application denied. Andrew exhaled slowly. Defeated. "So that's it? That's closure," I said. "You don't get to profit from the wreckage you caused." He stood slowly, eyes dim but not angry, just hollow. "I really did love you, you know," he said quietly. I nodded once. "Then you should have respected the architect." He left without another word. Shape after the meeting, the boardroom buzzed with adrenaline. One of the younger members, Naomi, said, "I've never seen power used so gracefully." "It's not power," I said. "It's clarity. The kind that takes years to afford." She smiled. Still, it was beautiful. justice usually is, I said softly. Shape, that evening, I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, and the air smelled of seaweed and storm. I sat on the sand, shoes off, watching the water slide in and out like breath. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced. I thought of Andrew not as the man who betrayed me, but as the mirror that showed me what I refused to become. And for the first time, I realized forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. It was something I owed myself. I whispered into the wind, "You don't have to hate what broke you to be done with it." The waves answered, folding the words back into themselves. Shape, later that night, I found a letter waiting at my desk. No return address, just my name, handwritten in familiar ink. Inside, one line. "You were always the better architect." No signature, but I didn't need one. I placed it beside the old photo I'd once torn in half. Then, I turned off the lamp. Shape, peace, I'd learned, isn't loud. It's the quiet after the apology you no longer need to hear. It's the freedom to build again, not from anger, but from intention. And as I fell asleep that night, the sound of the ocean drifting through the window, I realized something simple but absolute. My revenge had ended the moment I stopped needing to win. The rest was just architecture. Shape, her name was Clara Whitmore, 28, brilliant, and already bleeding from ambition. She walked into my office one gray Tuesday morning, a portfolio under her arm, fire behind her eyes, and the kind of composure that hides exhaustion. "I don't want a grant," she said before even sitting down. "I want direction." I liked her immediately. Most people came to the Meridian Foundation asking for funding. Clara came asking for a map. "Tell me," I said. "Direction away from what?" She hesitated, then laughed softly. "A man, obviously." I smiled. "Then you've come to the right architect." Shape over coffee, she told me her story. She'd co-founded a design firm with her fiancé, a golden boy in the tech world. Together, they built something dazzling. Until one morning, she arrived early to the studio and found him in the glass conference room with their investor. The look on her face, as she described it, stopped me cold. That quiet, hollow calm I knew too well. I didn't interrupt. I just let her speak until the silence between us filled with recognition. When she finished, she leaned forward. "I want to do what you did," she said. "I want to make him regret ever thinking I needed him." Shape, there it was. The echo of myself. I saw it in her posture, in the way her hands trembled slightly when she said the word regret. The hunger for justice, beautiful, dangerous, and sharp-edged. But she was still standing where I once did on the cliff before the fall, and I couldn't let her jump the same way. "Clara," I said gently, "revenge is seductive because it feels like control. But control and peace don't live in the same house." She frowned. "Then what's the point?" "The point," I said, "is to design an exit, not a weapon." She looked at me for a long moment, eyes narrowing in thought. "Everyone says that. You're the only one who actually did it." Her voice was steady, but her admiration unsettled me. I didn't want disciples. I wanted endings. Shape, over the next few weeks, Clara became my unofficial apprentice. We met twice a week, sometimes in the office, sometimes by the sea. I taught her structure, strategy, and the art of calm warfare. How to separate emotion from execution. How to document quietly. How to rebuild her own identity before dismantling his. She learned fast, too fast. Her confidence sharpened. Her tone steadied. Her eyes grew colder. One afternoon, she arrived with a folder and said, "I've drafted the takeover papers. I can freeze him out by month's end." I froze mid-sentence. "You're serious?" She nodded. "He took my company. I'm taking it back." The precision in her voice reminded me of myself signing those deeds years ago. Except this time, the reflection unnerved me. Shape, that night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the ocean and the whisper of conscience. Was this what legacy meant? Creating mirrors that repeated your mistakes in cleaner handwriting? I poured a glass of wine and stared out at the water. I thought of Maya's words. "You built this out of empathy, not ego." Was that still true? Or had I built an empire that taught revenge disguised as resilience? Shape. The next morning, I called Clara. "Meet me at the beach house," I said. She arrived in a storm gray coat, her hair tousled by wind. The tide was high, waves curling against the rocks like restless questions. I gestured for her to follow me inside. "Do you know what happened here?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Everyone does. This is where you found out." "No," I said softly. "This is where I stopped being a victim and almost became something worse." She frowned. "Worse?" "Unforgiving." "Shape." We stood by the same window where I'd once watched my marriage end. I told her everything. The sleepless nights, the anger that turned to calculation, the silence that became armor. "I thought I'd won," I said. "But the truth is, I almost lost something bigger than him myself." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Would you do it again?" "Yes," I said honestly. "But I'd do it differently. I'd aim for freedom, not proof." She looked down at her hands. "Freedom doesn't hurt enough." "It doesn't have to," I said. "That's how you know it's real." Shape. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she turned toward the ocean, her voice low. "I want to believe that. I really do. But right now I just want him to feel small." I stepped closer. "Then make him irrelevant instead. Nothing wounds arrogance more than indifference." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that sounds like surrender. "You always make it sound so easy." "It's not," I said. "But it's cleaner." Shape 2 weeks later. Clara emailed me. No attachments, no explanations. Just 2 sentences. I walked away. It's the first time I felt taller. I stared at the words for a long time, then closed my laptop. I didn't need to reply. She'd already written her ending. Shape. That evening, I went to the gallery near the pier, one of our foundation's new partners. They were hosting an exhibit titled Inheritance. The theme was transformation, the way women turn pain into architecture. One piece stopped me cold. A sculpture made of broken glass, shaped into a staircase. Its plaque read, "For E, who taught me to climb differently. Clara." I smiled. The kind that hurts and heals at the same time. Then I whispered, "Good girl." Shape walking home. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. The ocean shimmered silver beneath the streetlights. For the first time in years, I felt something close to joy, not the loud kind, but the quiet one that lives in peace earned through grace. And as I stood outside the beach house, I whispered to the wind, "Maybe legacy isn't who remembers your story. Maybe it's who stops repeating your mistakes." The sea responded with a slow, rhythmic applause. And I let it. Shape It started with a phone call from Zurich. The man's voice was smooth, accented, and unnervingly polite. "Elena Pierce?" "Yes. My name is Adrian Keller. I represent Apex Global Initiatives. We'd like to discuss a partnership with the Meridian Foundation." The name alone carried weight. Apex funded innovation, art, and female empowerment initiatives across continents. But their reputation was glossy, too glossy. "Send me the proposal," I said, my tone neutral. He hesitated, as though expecting excitement. "Of course, but I'd prefer to discuss it in person." "Fine," I said, "next week, San Francisco." Shape. When I told Maya, she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Apex?" "Yes." She arched an eyebrow. "They're sharks in silk ties. They'll smile while they swallow you whole." "Maybe," I said, "but I want to hear what they think they can buy." Maya sighed. "You don't negotiate with predators, Elena. You walk around them." I smiled faintly. "I built my piece in their language. I can translate the threat." Shape. The meeting was held in a high-rise overlooking the bay. Adrian Keller was exactly what I expected. Handsome, charming, every movement calibrated for persuasion. He greeted me with the kind of warmth that could sell chaos as opportunity. "Elena," he said, shaking my hand. "It's a pleasure. I've followed your work for months." "Then you know I don't sell it." He laughed lightly, as though I'd made a clever joke. "We don't want to buy it. We want to scale it." He gestured to the panoramic view behind him. "You've created a blueprint for female leadership. We can amplify that globally: seminars, licensing, media content, mentorship platforms. The Meridian method could become the next movement." The words slid across the table like oil on glass. Movements die in boardrooms, I said quietly. Not if they're profitable, he replied smoothly. Shape. He slid a folder toward me, branding concepts, potential sponsors, global projections. I scanned the pages. Each one stripped something from what I'd built. Authenticity became marketability. Empathy became strategy. Legacy became brand. It was a glossy rebranding of pain, and it disgusted me. You want to turn survival into merchandise, I said finally. He tilted his head, still smiling. We want to turn your philosophy into access. You could help millions. I met his gaze steady. At what cost? He didn't flinch. Every revolution needs an economy. Shape. That line lingered long after I left the building. It haunted me on the flight home, the seductive logic of it. Every revolution does need an economy. And yet, I knew the danger of power wrapped in purpose. I'd seen it before in Andrew. He once believed success could justify anything. I wasn't about to repeat his theology. Shape. Back at the foundation, the team was buzzing about the offer. Some saw opportunity, others smelled compromise. Naomi, my youngest board member, cornered me after the meeting. Elena, think about it, she said. This could fund 100 new programs. You could expand globally. Why not let them help? Because help with conditions is control in disguise, I said. But don't you want reach? I want integrity, I said. Reach without integrity is contagion. She frowned. You taught us to play smart, not small. That stung not because she was wrong, but because she was quoting me. Shape. That night, I sat alone at the beach house, the contracts spread out before me. The ocean outside was turbulent, dark waves crashing against the rocks as though echoing the storm inside my mind. The numbers were staggering. Funding that could triple our reach. Offices in New York, Paris, Tokyo. The world at my fingertips. And yet, something in the fine print made my skin crawl. Apex Global, to hold a 40% operational advisory stake in the Meridian Foundation. 40%. Enough to reframe everything I'd built. It would no longer be my voice guiding women. It would be their metrics, their quarterly goals, their silent censorship disguised as strategy. I stared at the ocean until dawn. When the first light hit the horizon, I whispered, no legacy is worth leasing. Shape. The next morning I called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. Elena, I was hoping you'd come to your senses. I have, I said. The answer is no. He was silent for a moment. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but it's mine to make. Elena, he pressed, his tone softening. You can't build walls around an idea. If you don't open the doors, someone else will. I smiled faintly. Then let them. I've seen what happens when the wrong people own the deed. He sighed. You could have ruled the world. I already rebuilt mine, I said. And it's not for sale. I ended the call. Shape. Later that week, a journalist reached out, the same Olivia Hart who'd once written about my redemption. She'd heard about Apex's proposal and wanted a quote. I sent her one line. Some offers look like opportunity until you read the fine print on your freedom. She published it verbatim. It became the quote of the week, reprinted everywhere from Harvard Business Review to Pinterest boards. Shape. A month later, Naomi came to my office. She looked contrite, holding a folder. I didn't understand, she said softly. I do now. Apex approached me privately. They wanted insider data. I refused. I smiled, pride softening the edges of disappointment. That's how you know you've grown, I said. When temptation looks cheap. She hesitated. How do you keep saying no when the world keeps offering yes? I looked at her and said, because I remember what it cost me to say yes the first time. Shape. That evening, I walked the shore again. The waves were calm now, the horizon clear. The wind carried the scent of salt and freedom, two things that never coexist with ownership. I thought of all the names once attached to me. Wife, victim, strategist, survivor, icon. Now, I just wanted to be a woman at peace with her design. And as the tide rolled in, I whispered one last truth into the dusk. Empires end when you forget what you were building them for. I'm building quiet. The ocean didn't answer this time. It didn't need to. Because silence, I'd learned, was the only sound that never lied. Shape. It was supposed to be just another event, another gallery opening, Another polite conversation over champagne. But that's the thing about peace. It never announces when it's about to change shape. I saw him before he saw me. Standing by one of Clara's sculptures, the staircase of glass that caught light like trapped memory. He was speaking with the curator, hands in his pockets, the casual confidence of someone who didn't need to impress anyone. Daniel. Of course. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 months since the Apex ordeal. He'd been traveling, consulting, living the kind of life that left no space for anything deeper than efficiency. And yet, when he turned and saw me, his expression softened instantly. Still haunting art galleries, I see. Habit, I said. Old ghosts feel safer when they're framed. He laughed low. Genuine, familiar. You always did speak like your words had furniture. Shape. We stepped outside after a while, the ocean visible in the distance. It had been years since the night I found Andrew at the beach house. Years since I'd measured my worth against someone else's betrayal. And yet, standing beside Daniel, I felt something unexpected. The quiet tremor of being seen, not studied. He glanced at me. You look different. How so? Like someone who stopped running a marathon she already won. I smiled faintly. You always were better at metaphors than business plans. Which is probably why you're rich, and I'm restless. We both laughed. But there was something beneath it, an unspoken gravity neither of us wanted to acknowledge yet. Shape. Over the following weeks, we kept running into each other at exhibits, board dinners, foundation meetings. It stopped feeling like coincidence. It felt like alignment. He started visiting the Meridian Foundation to advise our younger mentees. He was good with them, patient, kind, never condescending. He listened more than he spoke, which, in rooms full of power, is its own kind of rarity. One afternoon, he found me working late. The office was quiet. The only sound, the rhythmic tapping of rain against the glass. You know, he said, leaning against the doorway. For someone who claims to be done building empires, you work like you're still at war. Peace has paperwork, I said, not looking up. He walked closer, stopping beside my desk. Elena, you don't always have to prove you survived. I finally looked up. Old habits. He smiled softly. Then maybe it's time for new ones. Shape. We had dinner that night, no contracts, no agenda. Just two people who'd once circled each other through politics and pain, now talking like they'd finally run out of reasons not to. The restaurant was small, candlelit, the kind of place where time slows just enough for honesty. He told me about his family, a mother who painted, a father who left early, the inherited fear of failure that made him relentless. I told him about silence, how it used to feel like safety, and how sometimes it still did. You know, he said quietly, I always wondered why you never let anyone close. Not really. Because closeness feels like exposure, I said. And I've spent years mastering the art of being unexposed. He nodded. But exposure is how light gets in. I looked at him for a long time. That sounds rehearsed. He smiled. It's not. It's true. Shape. For weeks after that, I kept trying to reason myself out of it. Love or anything like it felt inefficient, messy, unstrategic. But the truth is, strategy had kept me alive. It had never made me feel alive. Daniel was patient. He didn't chase, didn't demand. He just showed up quietly, consistently, like the tide that never needed permission to return. One evening, we walked along the shore, the sky melting into shades of silver and dusk. Do you ever miss him? Daniel asked softly. Andrew? He nodded. I thought for a long moment. No, but I miss who I thought I was when I believed him. He didn't say anything, just reached for my hand. It was such a simple gesture, and yet it felt like crossing a border I'd built myself. I didn't pull away. Shape. That night, I stood by the window of the beach house again. The same place where everything had fallen apart. Only now, it wasn't haunted. It was inhabited. Daniel was downstairs, cleaning up the dishes from dinner, humming softly to himself. The sound was domestic, gentle, a lullaby I didn't know I needed. For a moment, fear surged, that reflexive voice whispering, don't trust comfort. But then, another voice, quieter, wiser, said, you earned this. I turned off the light and walked downstairs. He looked up, smiling. You have that look again. What look? The one that says you're arguing with peace. I laughed softly. Peace and I have a complicated history. He dried his hands, stepped closer. Elena, he said gently, you don't owe your strength, constant performance. The words landed deep. For the first time, I didn't respond with deflection. I just nodded. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Let someone hold the silence for you, for once. So I let him. Shape later that night, as we sat together watching the waves through the open window, he said quietly, you built a life out of precision. But maybe this part, he gestured toward the sea, doesn't need blueprints. I smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I'll still measure it twice. He laughed. Old habits? New ones, I said. Just better boundaries. He raised his glass. To better boundaries. I clinked mine against his. And to finally living without an audience. Shape. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of justice. No calculations, no ghosts. Just the steady rhythm of the tide outside. And the quiet comfort of knowing that survival didn't have to mean solitude. And as the moonlight stretched across the floorboards, I whispered into the stillness, maybe this is what victory really looks like. Not the empire rebuilt, but the heart reopened. The sea breathed in response, soft and steady. And I believed it. Shape it. Started with a subject line. Inquiry. Unpublished details Olivia Hart, The Chronicle. I stared at the email for a long time before opening it. The first few lines were polite, journalistic, professional. Elena, I've been contacted by sources claiming there's more to your story than what was ever reported. Sealed documents, financial maneuvers, timing discrepancies. I'd appreciate your perspective before we publish anything. There it was, the word that always split my world in two. Publish. Once, it had been a tool. Now, it was a threat. Shape. I forwarded the email to Maya immediately. Her reply came minutes later. She's bluffing. Sources mean speculation. Don't respond yet. But I knew Olivia. She wasn't reckless. If she was reaching out, she already had something. Later that day, my phone buzzed again, a text from Daniel. Dinner tonight? I'll bring the wine, you bring the calm. I smiled despite myself. But calm wasn't something I could bring tonight. Shape. By the time Daniel arrived, I'd already poured 2 glasses of red and reread the email 5 times. He noticed immediately. What's wrong? An old ghost with a press badge, I said, sliding him the phone. He read it carefully, jaw tightening. She wants the receipts. She wants the truth, I corrected softly. Or her version of it. He set the phone down. Then tell your own before she does. I shook my head. No. The story settled. Reopening it gives it new life. He studied me for a moment. You're not scared of exposure, Elena. You're scared of losing authorship. I met his eyes, the honesty cutting sharper than accusation. And can you blame me? No, he said quietly. But sometimes the only way to stay free of a story is to stop guarding it. Shape. That night after he left, I sat by the window again, the ocean whispering below. I thought about the first time Olivia had interviewed me, her gentle curiosity, the way she'd treated my pain like sacred evidence. I'd trusted her once. Maybe I still did, somewhere beneath the armor. So I drafted a reply. Brief, neutral, cautious, let's meet. But off record. One time, my terms. She responded within an hour. Agreed. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. At the cafe by the pier. Shape. The morning was gray. The kind of sky that feels like held breath. Olivia was already there when I arrived, notebook closed, recorder untouched. She stood to greet me. You look well, Elena. So do you, I said. Let's skip the nostalgia. She smiled faintly. Fair. We sat. The ocean murmured just beyond the glass, a reminder that everything cyclical eventually returns. I'll be direct, she said. Someone leaked documents suggesting the asset transfers between you and your husband weren't entirely legal? I finished for her. She hesitated. Transparent. I met her gaze. Do you believe that? I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. You've become a myth, Elena, and myths attract revisionists. I sighed. That's the problem with building quietly. No one sees the truth, just the outline. Shape. She leaned forward. Then give me the truth. Off record if you must. Just tell me something real. I looked out the window. The waves were calm today, deceptively calm. The truth, I said slowly, is that I never broke the law. I bent it strategically, intentionally, ethically. Every signature, every transaction was legal, just poetic. Her eyes softened. You outmaneuvered him. I corrected him, I said. He played ownership. I played legacy. She nodded, then said quietly, He's been trying to sell his version to other papers. You know that, right? I expected as much. But this time, he's including you. I smiled faintly. He's always included me. That was his mistake. Shape. When we left the cafe, Olivia paused on the sidewalk. For what it's worth, she said, I think you did what most people wish they could. You made justice look civilized. Civilized revenge is still revenge, I said. She studied me. You don't regret it, do you? Regret is just nostalgia for different timing, I said softly. No, Olivia, I don't. She nodded once, then walked away, her notebook still closed. Shape back at the beach house, I found Daniel waiting on the deck. He'd brought coffee, the kind of peace offering that meant he was worried. How did it go? He asked. She's writing something, I said. But not what he wants her to. He exhaled. You trust her? I trust her enough to let her misunderstand me gracefully. He smiled faintly. You really are the calm in your own storm. I had to be, I said. Otherwise, I'd have drowned. Shape. A week later, the article went live. Not scandalous, not flattering, balanced, human. Elena Pierce built her legacy not by breaking systems, but by learning their language and rewriting the fine print. No insinuations, no sensationalism. Just truth, sculpted, restrained, elegant. Still, it brought the past back into the light. Interviews requests, podcasts, invitations. Everyone wanted me to speak again. But this time, I didn't. Shape. Instead, I issued a single public statement. The story has already been told. The rest of it is life. It went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was final. People love closure, but they never understand that closure isn't silence, it's choice. Shape. That night, I and Daniel walked along the shore again. He slipped his hand into mine. Does it feel strange? He asked. What? Being free twice. I smiled faintly. Freedom is overrated. Peace, though that's rare. He looked at me. You've turned your story into a mirror, Elena. People see themselves in it. And mirrors, I said, only work if you're willing to look. He laughed softly. You sound like a headline again. I shook my head. No more headlines. Just horizons. Shape. We watched the sun sink into the ocean, slow, deliberate, inevitable. The water caught fire for a moment before softening into silver. And as I leaned against him, I realized something simple but absolute. I had survived the scandal, the silence, the spotlight, all of it. And none of it defined me anymore. It was just a story. And I had finally finished reading it. Shape. The letter arrived on a Monday. Cream paper, thick envelope, unmistakable weight. Even before I opened it, I knew. Andrew had finally played his last card. Inside was a legal summons, crisp, precise, venomous in tone. Notice of motion to reopen marital asset settlement. I read it twice, then once more, slower this time, as if repetition could change its meaning. He was contesting the foundation of our entire arrangement, claiming coercion, claiming unethical manipulation, claiming fraud. The irony made me laugh, sharp, humorless, clean. He was accusing me of rewriting what he'd already signed, as if the signatures, the filings, the witnesses, and his own arrogance had all been figments of imagination. I called Maya immediately. She answered before the second ring. I was expecting this, she said. You didn't tell me. Because I wanted you to enjoy a few quiet months before the next storm. Shape. We met that afternoon in her office. Same glass walls, Same immaculate precision. She handed me a copy of the petition. "He's not trying to win," she said. "He's trying to bleed you. Delay, distract, damage reputation." "Classic Andrew," I murmured. Maya nodded. "He doesn't want justice. He wants relevance." I leaned back, exhaling. "Then we'll give him the one thing he hates most." "What's that?" "Indifference." Shape still. Preparation was non-negotiable. We spent hours reviewing documents, contracts, timestamps, wire transfers, affidavits. Every detail from those months, when my quiet revenge had taken shape. "Everything you did was legal," Maya said. "But they'll argue morality. They'll call it strategic deception." "Let them," I said. "Truth doesn't need to shout to win." Shape the first hearing was held 3 weeks later. Small courtroom. Wood paneling. The smell of polished floors and quiet hostility. Andrew sat across from me, flanked by his new lawyer, younger, sharper, desperate to prove himself. Andrew looked older now, his confidence fraying around the edges. Still, when our eyes met, the old arrogance flickered, like a dying match refusing to go out. The judge entered. We stood. Then it began. Shape, his lawyer, painted me as a manipulator. An architect of deceit, he called me. He used words like premeditated, predatory, exploitative. He said I weaponized intellect and intimacy to gain financial control. Each sentence was a mirror warped just enough to distort the reflection. When it was our turn, Maya stood with calm precision. "Your Honor," she said, "my client is not a predator. She's a planner. She did what any intelligent person would do when faced with betrayal. She protected herself within the law." The judge listened quietly, expression unreadable. When it was over, the court adjourned. Decision reserved. As we left, Andrew brushed past me deliberately, whispering just loud enough. "This isn't over." I stopped walking. "It already was, Andrew. You just missed the ending." Shape, the media, of course, caught wind of it. Headlines appeared within hours. Andrew Ward seeks to overturn landmark settlement with ex-wife. Revenge or reclamation? The ethics of Elena Pierce. I ignored them all, but Daniel didn't. He showed up at my door that night, eyes dark with frustration. "They're trying to rewrite you," he said. "Let them try," I said. "Rewriting requires understanding. None of them have that," he paced. "This could get messy." "It won't," I said calmly. "I've lived through worse storms than ink." He stopped pacing, looked at me, and said quietly, "You don't always have to face them alone." I smiled faintly. "I know. But sometimes standing alone reminds them why they fell." Shape weeks passed. The case dragged. Andrew's filings grew desperate, erratic, emotional, full of contradictions. Every accusation was a confession disguised as projection. Maya handled it all with surgical detachment. I barely spoke in court anymore. I didn't need to. The truth had already learned to speak for itself. Shape then came the final day. The judge's ruling was brief, surgical, almost poetic in its simplicity. The court finds no evidence of coercion, fraud, or undue influence. The prior settlement remains binding and final. Mr. Ward's petition is dismissed with prejudice. In one sentence, it was over. Again. Andrew sat there, still and pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table as though he could hold on to something that had already slipped through. When the judge left, he looked at me one last time. No arrogance this time, just quiet disbelief. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Shape outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones extended. "Miss Pierce? Do you have a comment on today's ruling?" I paused, turned slightly, and said the only thing that mattered. Justice doesn't expire. Then I walked away. Shape that night, Maya and Daniel came over. We opened a bottle of wine, the same kind we'd shared the night I signed the deeds. The mood wasn't celebratory, just steady, peaceful. Maya raised her glass. "To being officially untouchable." I smiled. "To being officially done." Daniel leaned back. "You realize this is history now, right? You've built more than a foundation, you've built precedent." I looked at him, then at the ocean through the open window. "Then let it stand quietly," I said. The loudest legacies are the ones still being argued about. I'd rather build one that doesn't need defending. Shape later. After they left, I stood alone on the balcony. The waves glowed silver under the moonlight, endlessly in motion, endlessly forgiving. I thought about the years between betrayal and peace, every scar, every calculation, every line I refused to cross. I had fought with precision and restraint, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted balance. And tonight, for the first time, the scales felt still. Shape, I whispered into the quiet. He built empires. I built evidence. He sought ownership. I sought equilibrium. That's why I won. The sea answered softly, folding the past back into its rhythm. And I let it. Shape peace is strange when you finally earn it. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It just stays. Days blur into calm, and calm starts to feel heavy, like the air after a storm that refuses to leave. For the first time in years, I woke up without a plan. No filings, no meetings, no phone calls that could change the direction of my life, just sunlight and silence. Shape, the Meridian Foundation, was thriving, maybe too much. Dozens of new programs, international partners, documentaries. The movement I'd built from the ashes of one betrayal had become a machine of its own. Naomi, now managing director, was everything I'd once been: ambitious, brilliant, exacting. She came into my office one morning, tablet in hand, face glowing with ideas. Elena, hear me out. We can expand into Europe by next quarter. Partnerships in Berlin, Milan, maybe even Dubai. The numbers are... I held up a hand. Naomi. She stopped mid-sentence. Do you remember what I said when we started this? I asked. She smiled nervously. That we don't chase noise. We build meaning. And what happens, I said softly, when meaning becomes noise? She frowned slightly, the kind of frown I once gave Maya. Elena, growth isn't corruption. No, I said. But expansion without reflection is. Her voice softened. You're thinking of stepping back. I'm thinking of stepping aside. Shape, after she left, I walked through the foundation's halls. Each room hummed with life meetings, brainstorms, ideas being born faster than I could track them. It was beautiful, and it no longer needed me. That realization didn't sting. It felt right. For years, my purpose had been to prove something to the world, to Andrew, to myself. But proof has an expiration date. Shape, that evening, I told Maya. She didn't look surprised. I knew this was coming, she said. You've been restless. The kind of restless that only comes after resolution. I don't want to become the thing I fought, I said. An empire pretending it's still a cause. Maya poured wine. So what will you do instead? Disappear, I said simply. She smiled. You've done that before. It never lasts. This time it will, I said, because I'm not hiding. I'm handing over. She raised her glass. To exits designed with grace. Shape. A week later I announced it. No press conference. No dramatic farewell. Just an internal memo. Effective next quarter, I'll be stepping down as director of the Meridian Foundation. The next chapter belongs to those still learning how to build their voices. The news spread fast, as expected. Some called it brave. Others called it mysterious. A few said it was premature. But none of them understood. Endings are only premature when you confuse them for failure. Shape Daniel found out through Maya, of course. He showed up at the beach house that night. Wind in his hair, that familiar mix of worry and admiration in his eyes. You're really leaving? I'm not leaving, I said. I'm letting go. He sat beside me on the deck, the ocean whispering below. I should have known, he said. You've always had a talent for clean endings. I smiled faintly. It's the architect in me. He turned toward me. What will you do now? You've built justice, peace, legacy. What's left? I looked at the horizon, a thin silver line between night and water. Something smaller, I said. Something that doesn't need an audience. Shape. Over the next few days, I started packing small things. Books, sketches, letters from mentees, artifacts of a life built on resilience. I found the old photo again, the one of Andrew and me, torn neatly down the middle. I'd kept it out of practicality once. Now, I kept it as evidence not of love, but of evolution. I slipped it into a drawer and whispered, "You were the storm. I was the architecture." Shape. My final day at the foundation came quietly. The team surprised me with flowers, cake, and a slideshow of our first projects. Naomi gave a speech elegant, trembling slightly with emotion. She ended it with my favorite line, the one I'd written years ago. "Legacy isn't what outlives you, it's what outgrows you." The room erupted in applause, but I didn't cry. I just smiled, proud and certain, watching my own words belong to someone else now. Shape. That evening, Daniel and I drove up the coast. No destination, just movement. At sunset, we stopped near a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The wind was sharp, the light golden and soft. "This is where you started," he said quietly. "No," I said. "This is where I stopped ending." He looked at me for a long time. "You always talk like you're writing your own epilogue." "Maybe I am," I said, "but this one has room for silence." Shape. We stood there until the sky turned violet. The ocean below was endless, indifferent, alive. I thought of every version of myself that had existed. The wife, the strategist, the survivor, the architect, the founder. All of them had done their part. All of them had built the bridge that brought me here. But now, I wanted to step off it. Not to fall, to walk freely. Shape. When we drove back, I whispered something so quietly that Daniel almost missed it. "I think I'm ready to stop being a story." He smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. "You'll never stop being one. You'll just start telling a different kind." And somehow, that didn't scare me anymore. Shape. That night, back at the beach house, I stood by the window one last time. The moonlight stretched across the water like an open page. I whispered to the reflection staring back at me, older, calmer, free. "The war is over, and I'm not rebuilding, I'm resting." Then I turned away from the glass, because this time I didn't need to watch the ocean to feel its rhythm. It was already inside me. Shape. The sea had its own clock. Days blended into tide and wind. Time kept by the rhythm of waves, instead of meetings. I rented a small cottage farther down the coast, smaller than the beach house, humbler, quiet enough that I could hear the surf breathing through the windows at night. No staff, no calendar, no expectations. For the first time since I could remember, my life belonged only to me. I spent mornings painting, afternoons reading, evenings walking barefoot along the sand. No boardrooms, no decisions heavy enough to bend my spine. When people asked what I was doing next, I said the only honest thing I could: nothing, and everything that comes with it. Shape piece, I discovered, had its own kind of restlessness. Some nights I woke from dreams that felt like blueprints, intricate, unfinished, whispering build again. But I didn't rush it. I knew now that not every spark deserved to become a fire. Shape. One morning, as I sat sketching by the window, a knock broke the quiet. The mailman, sunburnt, cheerful, holding an envelope with unfamiliar markings. "From London," he said. "Looks important. London." The word carried history, the city where Andrew and I had once attended investment summits, charity galas, illusions of power. I took the envelope, thanked him, and waited until he was gone before opening it. The paper was heavy, the handwriting elegant. "Miss Pierce, my name is Charlotte Gray. I'm a curator for the Kensington Museum of Modern Architecture. We're organizing an exhibit on women who reshaped design and commerce in the 21st century. Your work, particularly the Meridian model, has been instrumental. We'd like to feature you, both in archival material and a keynote event. The invitation is formal, but the intent is personal. I believe your story belongs here. Warm regards, Charlotte Gray." I read it twice, slowly. Then I set it down and laughed, soft, incredulous. History had a sense of irony. The very world that once refused to see me now wanted to enshrine me. Shape. That evening, I called Maya. She answered on speaker, mid-commute. "Please tell me you're not tempted," she said after I read her the letter. "Tempted isn't the word," I said. "Curious, maybe." "Elena," she sighed. "You just escaped the spotlight. Don't crawl back into it." It's not the spotlight, I said. It's a mirror. I just want to see what reflection they've built of me. There was a pause. Then her tone softened. If you go as yourself, not the myth. Shape. I booked the ticket that night. London in spring gray skies, wet streets, the smell of rain on stone. The museum itself was breathtaking, a fusion of glass and history, like time redesigned. Charlotte met me at the entrance. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, confident, eyes bright with the kind of admiration that feels dangerous if you start to enjoy it. Miss Pierce, she said warmly. It's an honor. Just Elena, I corrected. She smiled. Then just Charlotte. Shape. She led me through the exhibit, blueprints, models, digital projections of women who had rebuilt more than structures. At the center of the hall, a large display bore the title, The Architects of Reclamation. And there, among the faces, plans, and quotes, was mine. A photo from the Chronicle interview. And below it, the line that had refused to die online. I didn't burn his empire. I redrafted the blueprint. I froze. It should have felt gratifying. Instead, it felt distant. That woman in the photo, sleek, composed, all restraint and eloquence, she was me once. But she was also a version I had already buried. Charlotte noticed my silence. Do you like it? I smiled faintly. It's beautiful. And inaccurate. She looked puzzled. Inaccurate? Because reclamation isn't architecture, I said softly. It's archaeology. She tilted her head. Maybe you could explain that at the keynote? I exhaled. You're persistent. She smiled. I wouldn't have written the letter if I wasn't. Shape. That night, I stayed in a small hotel overlooking the Thames. The city hummed below old ghosts in new suits. I watched the lights reflect in the river, thinking about everything the world thought they knew about me. A story built from half-truths and headlines. Maybe Maya was right, maybe I didn't owe the world another explanation. But part of me wanted to speak again. Not to correct the record, but to complete it. Not the revenge, the redemption after. Shape. The next morning, I walked through Hyde Park, gray skies splitting into pale sunlight. I thought of Andrew, his charm, his collapse, his final look in court when he realized the war was over. I thought of Clara and Naomi and all the women who had learned from the architecture of my mistakes. Maybe that was the point. Maybe I wasn't returning to be celebrated. Maybe I was returning to leave the blueprint for whoever came next. Shape. I called Charlotte that afternoon. Tell them I'll do it, I said. But no teleprompter, no pre-written script. I'll speak my own way. She sounded thrilled. Of course. You'll close the exhibit, the final voice. I smiled. Then I'll make sure it's worth listening to. Shape. That night, I stood by my hotel window, watching the rain begin again. The streets glistened, lights stretching like threads of gold between puddles. And as thunder rolled in the distance, I whispered to my reflection, if they want a story, I'll give them one. But it won't be about revenge anymore. It'll be about restoration. The city didn't answer. But its silence, like the seas, was a kind of approval. Shape. The auditorium was already full when I arrived. Rows of faces, investors, architects, students, journalists. Curiosity glowed like stage light. Charlotte met me backstage, holding a clipboard she didn't need. You'll speak last, she said. Just before the closing exhibit projection. I nodded, calm, almost detached. I wasn't nervous. I was centered. The kind of stillness that only comes when you've already faced worse rooms. Shape. When my name was announced, the applause startled me. Not because it was loud, but because it was warm. I stepped into the light. The room went quiet. I took a breath and looked at them not as an audience, but as witnesses. And then, slowly, I began. Shape. When people tell my story, I said, they start with a beach house. A soft ripple of laughter. They say it's where my marriage ended. They're wrong. It's where my silence ended. The laughter faded into focus. I learned something. Standing in that house, that betrayal is loud, but clarity whispers. And sometimes the whisper saves you before the noise destroys you. I paused, letting the weight of that settle. They also say I built my power through revenge, that I rewrote a man's empire into my own name. That part, at least, has truth in it. a few nervous chuckles. But what they don't tell you is what comes after. After justice, after headlines, after applause. What happens when the empire is yours and you realize you don't want it? The room stilled. No one moved. Shape, I spent years building walls made of intelligence, precision, and control. But peace isn't built that way. Peace is a doorway one you only find when you stop looking for applause on the other side. I smiled faintly. Everyone in this room wants to be seen as something. Strong, brilliant, untouchable. But power without tenderness isn't resilience, it's fear wearing makeup. A murmur spread through the audience. Some nodded. Some shifted. Uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort was where truth lived. Shape, I'm not here to defend what I did. I'm here to define what it became. When I reclaimed my voice, I thought I was restoring balance. But I was really creating a new kind of blueprint, one that allows women to build without permission, without apology, without erasing themselves in the process. The screen behind me changed images from the Meridian Foundation, women in workshops, art studios, classrooms, offices, faces full of purpose. Not vengeance, vision. This, I said, turning slightly toward the images, is the architecture that mattered. Shape. I glanced back at the crowd. People ask me if I forgive him. A pause. I do. Not because he deserves it, but because I do. Forgiveness isn't freedom for them, it's oxygen for you. It keeps you from living in someone else's unfinished chapter. A hush fell. The kind that hums, charged and reverent. Shape. I don't build for revenge anymore, I said quietly. I build for resonance. Because when the noise fades, that's what lasts, the echo of what you designed with intention. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage. I am not the woman who burned her husband's empire. I am the woman who learned that justice without grace is just another version of power. The line hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. Then I said the part I hadn't planned to. The part that came straight from the tide inside me. I don't want to be remembered as the woman who won. I want to be remembered as the one who stopped fighting. The silence broke with applause. Not thunderous standing. A slow wave of sound, growing, lifting, carrying. Charlotte's eyes shone from the side of the stage. Maya, I realized, was in the back row. I hadn't known she'd come. Even Daniel, leaning against the far wall, smiled the way people do when they see something inevitable finally arrive. Afterward, people approached me, journalists, students, quiet women with tears in their eyes. They said things like, "Thank you, and I didn't know you could tell the truth that gently." Charlotte hugged me. "You changed the room." I smiled. Rooms are just rooms. It's the echoes that matter. That evening, the museum hosted a private dinner for the speakers. Elegant tables, dim lights, the kind of formality that used to drain me. Now, it just felt like symmetry. The final chord of a long composition. Daniel joined me near the balcony overlooking the city. "You do realize," he said, "that was more sermon than speech." I smiled. "And yet, no one asked for salvation." He laughed softly. "You're different here. Softer." "I'm not softer," I said. "Just finished pretending hardness is strength." He studied me, then said, "You know, I don't think you've stopped being an architect. You just changed what you're building." "And what's that?" He touched my hand lightly. "Peace that doesn't need proof." When the night ended, I walked alone through the empty exhibit one last time. My photo still glowed softly on the wall, the quote beneath it catching the light. I whispered to it, half amused, half tender, "You've done your job. You can rest now." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years, not triumph, not relief, completion. As I stepped out into the cool London night, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of stone and renewal. The Thames shimmered beneath the bridge like liquid glass. And as I crossed it, I realized something profound and quiet. You don't need revenge to write your name into history. You just need truth. Steady, unshakable, kind. That night, as I lay in my hotel bed, I dreamt of the ocean again. Not violent, not dark, just steady the way memory becomes when it's forgiven. When I woke, sunlight was spilling through the curtains. And for the first time, I didn't think about what I'd say next. I just let the day begin. By the time I returned home, my face was everywhere again. Clips from the keynote had gone viral. They called it the soft revolution. Sound bites of my voice spread across social feeds, sliced into short, emotional reels. Some captioned it, "Forgiveness is oxygen." Others labeled it, "Architect of Grace." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built an entire life avoiding noise, and now silence had made me louder than ever. Naomi called first. She sounded breathless, caught between awe and chaos. "Elena, we're trending on 3 continents. Donations are spiking. Partnerships, interviews, speaking requests." "Slow down," I said, half smiling. "This isn't news." "It is," she said. "It's movement. They're quoting you everywhere. Young designers, women in business, even law forums. They're calling it the Meridian mindset." I sighed, leaning against the window. "That sounds dangerously like a brand." Naomi hesitated. "It's an idea, Elena. People need something to follow. Then teach them to lead," I said. I didn't give that speech for followers. But the current was already moving without me. Journalists wanted op-eds. Podcasts wanted sound bites. Publishers wanted a memoir. I declined all of it. Politely, firmly, the truth had been said. Anything more would only dilute it. Still, I couldn't stop what came next. The hashtag number built by her started trending, young women posting their own stories of resilience. Small victories, acts of courage dressed as everyday work. They tagged me. Thousands of them. I read some late at night, scrolling under lamplight. Stories of architects, nurses, teachers, entrepreneurs, all finding their voice in the blueprint of my words. It was humbling and terrifying, because I hadn't meant to start anything. Maya visited a week later, unannounced, as usual. She found me on the deck, barefoot, reading the newspaper. She set down a copy of The Guardian. Front page headline: "Elena Pierce, the woman who redefined power without noise." I looked up at her. "They make me sound like a tranquil hurricane." She laughed softly. "You are one." "I didn't want this," I said. "You didn't chase it. That's not the same thing." I frowned. "I just wanted peace, Maya. Privacy. To live without being a case study." She sat beside me. "Then maybe your peace is teaching others how to find theirs." I stared out at the ocean, quiet. "I don't know if I'm ready to be anyone's symbol." "Symbols don't choose themselves," she said gently. "They're chosen." Later that night, Daniel called from New York. He was consulting for an urban renewal project there, one that had adopted the Meridian model as its base. "Did you know they're using your framework?" he asked. "I didn't," I said. "Should I be flattered or worried?" "Both," he said with a laugh. "They're calling it Pierce Planning." I groaned. "That sounds like an accounting firm." "It sounds like impact," he said. "You've changed the way people think about structure, not just in design, but in recovery." I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "And what about you? Are you happy in New York?" "I am," he said. "But I miss the calm you built here." That line, "the calm you built," lingered long after the call ended. The next morning, I went for a walk through town. People recognize me now, not with the invasive curiosity of fame, but with quiet nods, polite smiles. At a small cafe, a girl about 20 approached me. She looked nervous, clutching her notebook. "Miss Pierce," she said, I wanted to thank you. I watched your speech. I was about to quit my architecture program. I didn't think I belonged there." I smiled softly. "And now? Now I do," she said. "Because you said we don't have to build like men to build something that lasts." Her voice cracked slightly. Before I could reply, she added, "I just wanted to say you're the reason I stayed." When she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at my coffee as it cooled. I had spent years mastering control, but nothing had prepared me for humility. Shaped that night, I walked the beach again. The tide was low, the moon pale and high. The world had taken my story, the betrayal, the courtroom, the foundation, the speech, and turned it into something larger than me. And I realized something crucial. Once you stop defending your story, it starts defending others. Maybe that was the point. Maybe I didn't own my narrative anymore. Maybe that was freedom too. Shape the next morning, Charlotte called from London. Elena, I hope you're sitting down, she said. The museum wants to expand the exhibit. Not just architecture, social design, policy, global leadership. They want to dedicate a section to the philosophy behind the Meridian model. I exhaled slowly. A philosophy? That makes it sound like scripture. Not scripture, she said. Structure. I smiled. You've been around curators too long, you're poetic now. It's your fault, she teased. You infected us with grace. Shape after the call. I stood by the window watching the horizon blur between sky and water. My life, once confined to courtrooms and strategy rooms, now rippled across continents. I hadn't even stepped foot in. And for the first time, I didn't feel invaded. I felt extended. Peace, I realized, wasn't the absence of noise. It was the ability to choose what sound to answer. Shape that evening, Naomi sent a final report, a yearly summary from the Meridian Foundation. I opened it out of habit more than curiosity. On the last page, she'd written a single note. You said legacy isn't what outlives you, it's what outgrows you. It's happening. Proud to build in your shadow. I smiled, tears welling unexpectedly. I closed the report, whispering to the room around me. Then, it's time to step out of it. Shape. The next morning, I packed a single suitcase. No press release. No itinerary. Just a flight booked under a different name. To somewhere without headlines or history. Before I left, I looked one last time at the ocean, the first and last witness to everything I'd become. I built my revenge, I whispered. Now I'm ready to build my rest. The wind caught the words, carried them toward the waves, and I let them go. 9. I hadn't heard my name spoken aloud in months. Not the new one I used at the small cafe by the harbor. Not the polite alias I signed on rental agreements. But Elena Pierce. It sounded strange again, sharp around the edges, like glass held too long in the sun. Shape. The voice came from behind me as I stood in line at the market. I turned, heart slowing before recognition bloomed. Clara? She looked older, thinner, a little worn, but unmistakable. Andrew's assistant. The one I used to pity before I learned she'd been part of it. Elena, she said, almost whispering. I didn't know if it was really you. I smiled faintly. It depends who's asking. Her eyes filled with something that looked too much like remorse to be performance. I'm not here for him, she said quickly. I just needed to see you once. Shape. We sat at a cafe overlooking the marina. The air smelled like salt and lemons. She fidgeted with her cup, avoiding my eyes. He's gone, she said finally. I didn't ask where. Financially? I said dryly. Spiritually? Or literally? Gone, she repeated. Heart attack. 3 months ago. The words didn't sting. They just settled heavy, quiet, inevitable. I thought you should know, she said. You were the last person he mentioned before. I stopped her with a small wave of my hand. Don't. She nodded. I understand. But part of me didn't. Part of me wanted to ask why now? Shape. After a moment she added, I left him before it happened. I've been clean for a while. No deals, no lies. I even went back to school. Her voice trembled slightly. I'm studying contract law. I couldn't help but smile. That's poetic. She looked at me, really looked. Everything you did, she said softly. It changed more than his name on a deed. It changed me. I thought power only came from proximity to it. You proved it could come from principle. I stared at her, unsure whether to feel proud or tired. Maybe both. You don't owe me gratitude, Clara, I said. She shook her head. It's not gratitude. It's closure. Shape. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves slap against the dock. Finally, she reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. What's this? A letter, she said. From him. For you. I didn't move to touch it. She hesitated. He wrote it a week before. Said it wasn't an apology, more like a confession. I sighed. He was always better at dramatics than sincerity. She smiled faintly. You don't have to read it. I won't, I said automatically. But even as I said it, I knew I would. When she left, she hugged me. The gesture startled me warm, human, fragile. Thank you, she whispered. For being the kind of woman who didn't destroy me just because you could. As she walked away, I realized that maybe she had been the last piece of the past I needed to face. Back at the cottage, I sat by the window with the envelope in my lap. The handwriting was unmistakable, controlled, practiced, still desperate to impress. I ran my thumb over the seal, debating. Then, I broke it. Inside was a single page, written in his perfect, self-conscious script. Elena, you always said revenge was beneath you. You were right. You didn't seek revenge. You sought justice. And in doing so, you built something I couldn't destroy because it never belonged to me. If legacy is ownership, you've already won. But if legacy is peace, I hope you find that too. I never did. Andrew, I read it once. Then again, slower. Then I folded it neatly and set it aside. No tears, no triumph. Just understanding. He had finally built something honest, even if it was just a paragraph. That night, I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, the sand cool under my feet. I held the letter for a long time before the wind caught it. It fluttered, lifted, and drifted into the dark. Not burned, not buried. Released. The next morning, a small package arrived at my door. No sender listed. Inside was a book leather-bound, embossed with gold lettering. The Meridian Principle, Essays on Modern Resilience. Naomi's name was on the cover. Inside she'd written a note. For Elena, who taught us that power, when reclaimed with grace, becomes design. Every chapter of this was built from your silence. I laughed softly, not bitter, not proud, just alive. The foundation had outgrown me, just as I'd hoped. Now it was building stories I'd never have the chance to control. Maybe that was what legacy truly meant, not being remembered, but being continued. That afternoon, I called Daniel. He picked up instantly. You heard? I said. About him? Yes. He was quiet. Then, how do you feel? Like a book finally closed. I said. Not ripped out, just closed. He exhaled. That sounds like peace. It is, I said. But peace doesn't mean stillness. It just means I finally know which direction I'm walking. He smiled through the line. And where is that? Forward, I said. Always forward. That evening, I wrote my first letter in years, not to him, but to Naomi. Keep building. Don't let them romanticize me. I wasn't flawless. I was deliberate. And that's enough. Teach the next generation that grace and grit aren't opposites, they're allies. I sealed it with wax, slipped it into the outgoing post, and felt something unclench inside me. As the sun set, I returned to the beach once more. The ocean looked endless again, as it had the first time I'd stood before it, before revenge, before justice, before legacy. The tide whispered against the shore like memory. I whispered back, You win, Andrew. You were right about one thing. I never found peace in victory. I found it after. The wind took the words, carrying them out over the waves, and this time, they didn't come back. The job offer came folded inside a brochure. Community College of Coastal Design visiting lecturer. Ethics and Enterprise in Modern Architecture. At first, I laughed. Then, I didn't. It wasn't fame. It wasn't power. It was something gentler. Relevance without spotlight. I moved again farther up the coast this time. A fishing town where the air always smelled like salt in early mornings. I rented a small flat above a bookstore. The owner, a kind older woman named Helen, insisted the second-floor balcony had the best view of sunsets and secrets. She wasn't wrong. Every evening, the sky melted into watercolor over the sea, and for the first time in years, I let beauty exist without needing to translate it into meaning. The classroom was small, 20 students, one whiteboard, and walls that still carried faint chalk ghosts of previous lessons. They didn't recognize me. To them, I was Miss Ellis, not Elena Pierce. The anonymity was liberating. I spoke freely, laughed easily, taught not as someone who had built empires, but as someone who had survived one. One morning, during office hours, a student lingered after the others left. Her name was Arya Patel, sharp, reserved, the kind of intelligence that hides behind silence until it's ready to strike. She hesitated at my desk, clutching a rolled-up design portfolio. Miss Ellis, can I ask you something personal? I smiled. That depends on how personal. It's about ethics, she said carefully. But not the kind in textbooks. I leaned back. Go on, she exhaled. My fiancé and I started a design firm last year. He's ambitious. And lately, he's been making choices I can't justify. Cutting corners. Using cheap labor. But if I walk away, I lose everything. Clients, contracts, even my reputation. Her eyes flicked up to mine. What would you do? I studied her for a long moment. She reminded me of myself 20 years younger, standing at a similar crossroads, weighing integrity against illusion. Let me tell you something, I said softly. Every decision that keeps you awake at night is trying to save your life. Listen to it, she frowned. So I should leave? I didn't say that, I replied. I said, listen, sometimes the right choice isn't to run. Sometimes it's to outgrow. She nodded slowly, her eyes shimmering with conflict. Thank you, she said. You sound like someone who's lived this. I smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how common it is. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time. Arya's words had pulled something from the depths, a memory of my own bargaining years, when I told myself compromise was strategy. It never is. Compromise is just quiet erosion. Weeks passed. The students grew bolder debates about sustainability, moral gray zones, profit versus principle. I saw reflections of myself in every argument, every stubborn conviction. Teaching became a mirror I hadn't expected to face, one that reflected not who I was, but who I might have been if someone like me had been there to warn me sooner. Then, one afternoon, Arya didn't come to class. By the second absence, I grew uneasy. By the third, she appeared eyes red, voice quiet. Can we talk? She asked. We met in the courtyard, under the old fig tree that shaded most of campus. He took everything, she said. The company, the designs, even my savings. He said it was all in his name anyway. I felt a chill run through me, not of anger, but déjà vu. What did you do? I asked. I signed away my shares. I just wanted it to end. Her voice cracked. I thought I was smart enough to see it coming. I looked at her steady. Being smart isn't protection. It's preparation. And sometimes you don't realize you were preparing for something until it happens. She looked up, eyes glistening. How did you survive something like that? I hesitated. Then, quietly, I said, by refusing to let pain become my personality. Over the next few weeks, I mentored her quietly off-record, off-syllabus. We rebuilt her confidence, her portfolio, her vision. One afternoon, she came into my office holding a new design, a coastal housing project. Minimalist, sustainable, elegant. She'd titled it The Haven, the same name I'd once given the Foundation's first safe housing complex. She had no idea, but the symmetry made me smile. A month later, she told me she'd applied for an independent grant, one that could fund her project entirely without him. When the acceptance letter came, she ran into my classroom, breathless. They chose me, she said, laughing through tears. I'm starting over. I stood, smiling. Then you've already won. She hugged me, impulsive, fierce, grateful. For a moment, it felt like the universe had handed me a mirror and said, now watch someone else get it right. That night, I walked along the shore again. The tide was low, moonlight spilling silver across the sand. I thought about Arya, her courage, her timing, her resilience. Maybe every story repeats until it's rewritten correctly. Maybe hers was the version of mine that ended without blood or courtrooms. Maybe that was the quiet gift of survival to turn pain into prevention. A few days later, the dean called me into his office. He smiled politely, holding a letter. We've had wonderful feedback, Miss Ellis. Students adore you. The board would like to offer you a permanent faculty position. I hesitated. For years, permanence had felt like a cage. Now it sounded almost kind. I'll think about it, I said. He smiled. Of course, but I hope you stay. Some architects build skylines. You build people. That evening, I told Daniel over the phone. He laughed softly. I knew you couldn't retire. Peace isn't your destination, Elena. It's your classroom. I go by Ellis now, I teased. You always did like reinvention, he said. Maybe that's your real blueprint. Maybe he was right. Before bed, I opened my window and listened to the ocean. It sounded different here, not angry, not sorrowful, just alive. And I realized something simple. You can't outrun your past, but you can outgrow its purpose. Mine had finally become something larger than survival. The next morning, I stood before my students and began the lecture with a quote, one they didn't know was mine. Legacy isn't what outlives you, it's what outgrows you. They wrote it down, pens scratching in rhythm, and as they did, I smiled. The words weren't a lesson anymore. They were a seed. It started with a headline. The Haven Young Architect Redefines Coastal Sustainability. Aria's face was on the cover of the Architectural Review. Confident, radiant, fearless. The article credited her innovation, her design, her philosophy. But one line caught my attention. Arya Patel, a former student of Miss Ellis, attributes her moral framework to an unnamed mentor who once told her, "Every sleepless choice is a sign of conscience." I smiled. The words had traveled even when my name hadn't. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an international number. I almost ignored it. But something intuition, maybe, made me answer. "Miss Ellis?" A warm British voice said. "This is Marianne Fielding from the Global Design Forum. We'd like to invite you to our annual summit in Singapore." I hesitated. "I think you have the wrong person." "I don't," she said softly. "Your student, Miss Patel, recommended you. She called you the quiet architect who built her courage." I laughed lightly. "She's generous. She's also persuasive," Marianne said. "Your story has reached further than you think. The board wants you to deliver the closing keynote." I froze. The word keynote carried weight, memory, echo, exposure. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm not a public figure." There was a pause. Then gently, "Perhaps not, but you are a public influence." I spent the night thinking about it. The sea was loud again, churning against the rocks. It reminded me of the night I first discovered Andrew's betrayal. The same rhythm, the same tension between fury and clarity. Back then, I'd chosen to act. This time, I wasn't sure. Was it bravery to step back into the world? Or vanity disguised as purpose? The next morning, I told Maya. "Singapore," she repeated, grinning through the video call. "Full circle, Elena. You've gone from headlines to history." "I'm not sure I want to be either." She tilted her head. "You told me once that silence was a design choice, not a retreat. Maybe this time, speaking isn't noise. Maybe it's structure." I sighed. "I just don't want to become an idea again." Maya smiled softly. "Then speak as a person." I talked to Daniel that evening. He was back in New York, still designing city spaces that looked like poetry carved from steel. "You should do it," he said simply. "Everyone keeps saying that," I replied. "That's because they're right," he said. "You're not the same woman who gave that speech in London. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You'd be speaking from peace, not pain. And if it pulls me back into the spotlight, then leave before the lights burn," he said. "You've always known when to exit a room." I accepted the invitation. The conference was held in a vast glass hall overlooking the Marina Bay skyline. Hundreds of delegates, architects, activists, CEOs, every continent represented. When I arrived, Marianne greeted me with warmth and curiosity. "You look calmer than anyone has a right to before a keynote," she said. I smiled. "Calm is just what's left after you've already fought every battle." She laughed. "Then I can't wait to hear what peace sounds like." Backstage, I waited behind a white curtain, listening to the murmur of the audience. Through the gap, I saw Arya sitting in the front row, eyes bright, notebook open. She didn't know I'd come. I wanted it that way. When the announcer said my name, "Miss Ellis, designer and mentor of the Haven Project," I stepped out. The applause was softer this time. Not celebrity applause. Recognition applause. "I'm not here as a designer," I began, "or even as a teacher. I'm here as a reminder that the structures we build outside mean nothing if we don't build ethics inside." The room quieted instantly. When I was younger, I believed power came from precision. That if I could control every detail, I could control every outcome. But architecture, like life, is full of shifting foundations. Sometimes, the storm isn't there to destroy what you've built. It's there to test whether you built it to last. A few people nodded. Others leaned forward, listening closely. I once lost everything, I continued. Not because someone took it from me, but because I built it with the wrong purpose. I built to prove, to win, to silence doubt. And in doing so, I mistook survival for success. I paused, watching faces shift, soften. But then, I discovered something quiet and radical. The real architecture of success is peace. And peace isn't passive, it's designed. Behind me, the screen lit up with images not of me, but of others. Women and men around the world, working under the Meridian model. Building projects that prioritize dignity as much as design. This, I said, turning toward it, is what legacy looks like when you stop chasing your name. A hush. Then applause, warm, full, sustained. Not the roar of admiration, the murmur of understanding. Afterward, Arya found me in the crowd. She was crying not with sadness, but pride. You came, she whispered. I wouldn't have missed it, I said. They asked me to give a talk tomorrow, she said shyly. On mentorship. I smiled. Then it's your turn to build. That night, at the after-event dinner, I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the bay. The air was warm, thick with jasmine and neon light. Daniel called. I watched the live stream, he said. You were magnificent. I kept it simple. You always do, he said. That's why it works. I looked out over the water, the reflection of skyscrapers shimmering like stars caught in the tide. Do you ever think, I asked, that peace can exist in motion? That maybe we're not supposed to stop, just learn how to move without friction? He smiled through the line. If anyone's designed that balance, it's you. When the call ended, I stood there for a long while, watching the lights flicker across the bay. I thought about everything it had taken to get here. Betrayal, silence, rebuilding, release. And I realized something I hadn't before. I hadn't escaped my story. I'd rewritten its purpose. It wasn't a tale of vengeance. It was a manual for rebuilding one choice at a time. As I turned to leave, Marianne stopped me. Elena? Or should I say, Miss Ellis, they're planning a documentary on the movement your foundation started. Would you be willing to appear? I smiled softly. Only if I can narrate it from off-screen. She laughed. Still hiding? Still building, I said. That night, I packed my bags again. The flight home was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but completion. As the plane lifted, I looked down at the glittering city below a map of light and memory. And somewhere between clouds and sunrise, I finally understood. Legacy wasn't a name carved into history. It was a ripple moving, reshaping, continuing long after you stopped chasing it. The envelope was waiting for me when I returned home. Cream paper, blue ink, familiar handwriting. Naomi's. Elena, I know you don't like surprises, but this one felt inevitable. The bank contacted us about a property transfer of the coastal estate once registered under Andrew Ward's name. It appears the final deed has cleared probate. The house is legally yours again. Do what you wish with it. Sell it. Burn it. Rebuild it. But if I know you, you'll make it mean something. N. I read the letter twice. The beach house. The place where everything broke and, in a strange way, began. It took me a week to decide to go back. The drive down the coast was long and silent. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like memory itself was pressing down, thick with salt and ghosts. When I finally pulled up to the old gates, they creaked open with the sound of something waking. The house stood exactly as I remembered. Pale stucco, weathered shutters, the balcony overlooking the restless sea. But time had stripped it of its arrogance. It looked smaller now, human. Inside, dust coated everything, furniture draped in sheets, glass dull from neglect. The faint smell of ocean mixed with old perfume. I walked through each room slowly, letting the silence speak. The study where he'd kept his ledgers. The kitchen where I'd once found the second wine glass. The bedroom I hadn't entered since that night. Everything was still, preserved, unforgiven. Upstairs, the window overlooking the beach was still cracked, the one I'd slammed shut years ago before leaving for good. Through it, I could hear the tide pulling in, slow and patient. I stood there for a long time, trying to feel anger, grief, nostalgia, anything. But what came instead was something quieter: acceptance. This wasn't a crime scene anymore. It was just a house. And like all architecture, it could be redesigned. I called Naomi that night. She sounded startled to hear my voice. "You went back, didn't you?" "Yes." "And?" "It's ready," I said. "For something new." She hesitated. "You're not thinking of living there again?" "No," I said softly. "I'm thinking of rebuilding it." "As what?" I looked out at the sea, the horizon trembling with light. "As what it should have always been, a refuge." Over the next few weeks, I met with contractors, designers, environmental experts. The plan was simple: restore the structure, transform the purpose. The main hall would become a community retreat, a safe space for women rebuilding their lives after loss or betrayal. Workshops on financial independence, design, and resilience. A place where silence wasn't punishment, it was preparation. I called it the Tide House, because like the ocean, it would take in pain and return it as something new. One afternoon, as workers began clearing debris, I found an old box tucked behind the mantel. Inside were photos from a life that felt fictional now. One of Andrew, smiling too widely. One of us, before everything. I stared at it for a long moment, then placed it gently back in the box. Some memories don't need erasing. They just need context. During reconstruction, I kept my distance, checking in quietly, guiding without controlling. For once, I didn't need to micromanage the outcome. I trusted the process. Naomi visited one afternoon to see the progress. She walked through the new open floor plan, eyes wide. "It's beautiful," she said. "But it feels different, peaceful." "That's because it isn't built for power anymore," I said. "It's built for people." She smiled. "You really turned your battlefield into a sanctuary." I looked around. Maybe it was always trying to be one. When construction finished, the transformation was breathtaking. White walls kissed by sunlight. Glass panels that let the ocean in without letting it drown the room. Quiet corners for reading. Reflection, rebuilding. The old staircase, once a symbol of distance, now curved gracefully toward the upper floor, where meditation rooms overlooked the horizon. It wasn't grand, it was whole. The opening ceremony was small, 30 guests, most of them women from nearby towns. Some survivors, some seekers, all builders in their own way. Naomi gave a short speech ending with, "This house once held silence born of betrayal. Now, it holds silence born of healing." When it was my turn, I simply said, "Welcome home." The applause was soft, like wind against glass. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like forgiveness. Later that evening, after everyone left, I stayed behind. The sun was setting, golden light spilling across the floorboards. I walked out onto the balcony, the same one where I'd once stood, shattered. Now it faced the same sea. But the sound was different. It wasn't accusation. It was invitation. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "You can rest now." I wasn't sure if I meant the house, the past, or myself. Maybe all three. Before leaving, I placed a plaque by the entrance. Not with my name, I didn't need that anymore. Just 3 words. Designed for renewal. The sea breeze caught my hair as I stepped back to look at it. And for the first time, I realized the truth. I hadn't built a monument to pain. I'd built proof that even ruin could become refuge. Driving away, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The house glowed softly in the distance, standing between memory and horizon. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel triumph. Just a quiet knowing that I'd finally closed the circle. As the road curved along the coast, Daniel called. "Are you still there?" he asked. "Just leaving. Does it feel different?" "Yes," I said. "It feels finished." He paused. "Then what's next?" I smiled at the fading light. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I think that's the point." That night, the ocean sounded like applause. And for once, I didn't feel like it was for me. It was for the woman I used to be, the one who survived long enough to stop surviving. The first guests arrived 2 weeks after the Tide House opened. Women came from every direction, some local, others from cities I'd never been to. They brought stories folded into silence. Some spoke immediately. Others just sat by the windows, staring at the ocean until words found them. I never asked. I'd learned long ago that healing doesn't answer to curiosity, it answers to time. On the third day, a woman named Juliet Hayes checked in. Mid-30s. Polished. Tense. She introduced herself with the poise of someone who'd practiced detachment for years. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, looking around the main hall. "It used to be something else," I said. She glanced at me, curious. "What did it used to be?" "A mistake," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Then it must be nice to see it rebuilt." "Every day," I said. Over the next few days, Juliet kept to herself. She joined the morning meditation, helped in the kitchen, walked the beach alone, but silence clung to her like perfume, deliberate, elegant, concealing. One afternoon, she found me in the garden. I was pruning the hydrangeas, the same kind that used to line the balcony years ago. "Do you ever think peace is overrated?" she asked suddenly. I looked up, meeting her eyes. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because peace doesn't fix anything. It just teaches you how to live with it." I smiled. "That's one way to see it." "And the other?" she asked. "That peace isn't the absence of wounds," I said. "It's the proof that you stopped letting them dictate the shape of your life." She didn't respond, but her eyes shimmered with something fragile. That night, after dinner, Juliet found me again. This time she didn't hide the tremor in her voice. "He cheated," she said quietly. "My husband, with my assistant." I froze for a moment, the words echoing through time like déjà vu. "I'm sorry," I said softly. She shook her head. "Don't be. I'm not the first. I just thought I was smarter than most." "Smarter has nothing to do with betrayal," I said. "They depend on trust, not intelligence." She laughed bitterly. "He said I was cold, too calculating, not emotional enough." I tilted my head. "Let me guess he said that after you caught him?" Her lips parted in surprise. "Yes." "Then he wasn't describing you," I said. "He was confessing himself." She stared at me, silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "How did you know?" I met her eyes. "Because that's exactly what mine said." She blinked, realization dawning. "Elena Pierce?" she breathed. "You're her." The name hit the air like wind through glass, sharp, reverent, dangerous. I didn't deny it. I just nodded once. We sat outside under the stars. She asked questions, some hesitant, others hungry. And for the first time in years, I told the story not as legend, not as defense, but as truth. Not the court filings or the headlines. Just the nights of silence. The mornings of endurance. The long architecture of rebuilding. When I finished, Juliet was crying. But not from sadness. From recognition. "You make it sound survivable," she whispered. "It is," I said. "But not immediately. You don't rebuild the day the storm ends. You start when you finally stop checking if it's coming back." Over the next week, Juliet changed. She smiled more. Her voice lost its tremor. She started journaling, then leading morning walks for new arrivals. One afternoon, she came to me holding a folded piece of paper. "It's a proposal," she said. "An idea for a new program here. For women who've left marriages with no financial safety net. I want to call it the Ledger Project." I took the paper, scanned it, and smiled. "You've thought this through." She shrugged. "I was a CFO before I was a wife." "That's exactly why you'll make it work," I said. She looked at me, hope flickering. "You'll let me run it?" "I'll let you own it," I said. That evening, as I watched her explain her plan to the others, I realized something profound. I was no longer the center of the story. I was the soil beneath it. The women were building something far greater than my own redemption. They were multiplying it. Each new arrival arrived broken. Each left redesigned. Still, some nights I woke with echoes: Andrew's voice, Clara's tears, my own rage disguised as reason. The house had new walls, but the old ghosts still whispered sometimes. One evening, I walked down to the shore. The moonlight stretched like a silver path across the water. Juliet joined me quietly. You ever think about him? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but not as a man, as a moment. She nodded slowly. I think that's where I want to get to. You will, I said. One day you'll realize you stopped telling your story to hurt him. You'll tell it to heal yourself. She smiled. That sounds like peace. It is, I said. And it's overrated until you finally earn it. A few days later, Juliet left the Tide House. She hugged me before getting into her car. Thank you, she whispered, for proving survival doesn't have to be loud. As she drove away, I watched her silhouette fade into the golden horizon. Some part of me, the last fragment of the woman I used to be, finally went with her. That night, I stood on the balcony, looking out over the sea. The waves shimmered like memory, endless and forgiving. I whispered to the wind, You see, Andrew? Even the ruins learned how to rebuild. The ocean roared softly in response, steady and eternal. And this time, I didn't hear ghosts. I heard legacy. The letter arrived on Tide House stationery I didn't recognize. I unfolded it, curious. Dear Miss Ellis, we're excited to inform you that the Tide House has been nominated for the National Humanitarian Design Award. Your innovative model of restorative architecture, merging emotional recovery with spatial design, has transformed lives across the country. The committee would like to feature you at the award ceremony. Please confirm your attendance. Warmly, Dr. Hannah Liu, Chair, National Council of Civic Design. I stared at it for a long moment. The irony was almost cinematic. A house that once hid betrayal was now being celebrated as a monument to healing. The blueprint of my pain had become the architecture of hope. And yet, my first instinct was resistance. I brought the letter to Maya during her next visit. She skimmed it, then gave me that look, the one that said she'd already made her decision before I finished reading. You should go, she said. No, I replied. You know what happens when I step back into the light. It turns me into something else, a story, a symbol. Maybe this time, she said softly. The story is ready for you. I frowned. What does that mean? It means you've spent years teaching women to stop hiding, she said. Maybe it's time to take your own advice. The decision haunted me all week. Every time I walked through Tide House, I felt the weight of its history pressing against its present. Each corner whispered, You built this by being brave once. Be brave again. Still, I wasn't sure if bravery meant stepping forward or stepping aside. Juliet called a few days later from Boston. The Ledger project is spreading, she said excitedly. We're launching a second location in Chicago next spring. And the award? You have to go, Elena. You are the reason this exists. I'm not sure that's true anymore, I said. It doesn't matter, she replied. Sometimes the face of something isn't ownership. It's representation. I smiled. You've been talking to Maya, haven't you? Constantly, she said with a laugh. We're building an empire of graceful stubbornness in your honor. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out onto the balcony, the ocean breathing below. In the dark reflection of the glass doors, I saw two versions of myself. The woman who once stood here broken, and the woman standing here now, whole but hesitant. And for the first time, I realized they weren't opposites. They were the same. One built from fire, the other from ash. I decided to go. The ceremony was held in New York, of course it was. The city of reinvention, where names and stories get rewritten every hour. When I arrived, the hall was stunning glass chandeliers, marble floors, an audience dressed in ambition. Naomi greeted me near the stage, radiant as ever. I knew you'd come, she said. I wasn't sure until the last moment, I admitted. She smiled. That's what courage looks like, hesitation followed by motion. When my name was announced, the applause startled me. Not the volume, but the warmth. They didn't clap for the scandal. They clapped for the solution. I walked to the podium slowly, every step a bridge between past and present. I once believed architecture was about permanence, I began. About building something that could withstand time, tide, and truth. A quiet laugh rippled through the room. But I was wrong. The strongest structures aren't made of steel or glass. They're made of forgiveness. Forgiveness of others. Forgiveness of yourself. I glanced at the front row, Naomi, Maya, Juliet. 3 different reflections of everything I'd built. When I built the Tide House, I wasn't trying to create a monument, I said. I was trying to rewrite the purpose of a wound. And what I discovered is this. When you stop defending your scars, they start teaching others how to heal. A hush settled over the hall. Some people were crying. Others simply watched, as if afraid to breathe. I continued softly. People often ask what revenge feels like. The truth is, I don't remember. But I do remember the day I stopped needing it. That line, that simple confession drew applause, quiet at first, then rising like a tide. After the ceremony, journalists crowded around, asking questions I'd spent years avoiding. What inspired the Tide House? How did your personal story shape its design? Do you consider yourself a survivor or a reformer? I smiled. The Tide House wasn't inspired by pain, I said. It was inspired by the decision not to waste it. Then I turned, leaving before they could ask more. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. The city lights flickered across the Hudson like a restless constellation. Daniel was waiting near the car. He smiled when he saw me. "You did it again," he said. "No," I said quietly. "We did." He tilted his head. "So what now?" I looked up at the skyline towers of glass and ambition. "Now," I said, "we let the story live without me." He nodded slowly. "You really think you can walk away this time?" I smiled faintly. "I'm not walking away. I'm walking forward." The next morning, I woke to headlines again. Only this time, they weren't about scandal or revenge. The Tide House founder redefines healing through design. Elena Pierce speaks on turning betrayal into blueprint. Architecture meets empathy. A new model for renewal. For once, the narrative was clean. No sensationalism. No cruelty. Just truth. I closed the paper, made coffee, and sat by the window overlooking the city. The hum of life outside felt distant, manageable. I thought of the ocean again, of the waves that once carried my pain and now carried my peace. Maybe anonymity wasn't silence. Maybe it was simply the art of choosing when to speak. And this time, I'd chosen perfectly. Before leaving New York, I stopped by an art gallery downtown, a small exhibit called Reclaimed Spaces. The first photo I saw froze me, the Tide House glowing under sunset. The caption read, "Built from loss, designed for renewal. Location confidential." I smiled. It was perfect. For once, my name didn't need to be attached to beauty for it to be mine. That night, I boarded a train heading back to the coast. As the city lights faded, I whispered to my reflection in the window. The story doesn't end when the world forgives you. It ends when you forgive the world. Outside, the dawn was breaking slow, golden, unstoppable. And I didn't feel like the woman who had lost everything. I felt like the architect of something eternal. The world moved faster than I did. Within months, the Tide House became more than a sanctuary. It became a symbol. Newspapers called it the living blueprint. Universities added it to ethics courses. Governments invited consultations. Everywhere I looked, I saw fragments of my philosophy redesigned, repurposed, reborn. The Meridian Foundation had merged with the Tide Initiative, forming a global alliance for ethical design. Naomi ran it from London now. Juliet's Ledger project had expanded into 6 cities. And Aria? She'd just been named one of Forbes' 30 under 30 innovators in sustainable architecture. The irony was divine. I'd built an empire by trying not to build one. I lived quietly in a seaside town now, one that smelled of pine and morning rain. No one knew my name here. I went by Ellis, taught part-time, kept a garden. Peace had become a practice, like watering plants or letting go. Some days, letters still arrived. Grateful strangers, survivors, young architects who found strength in words I'd written long ago. I read them, smiled, and filed them away in a small wooden box marked Echoes. Not trophies, just reminders. One morning, Maya called. Her voice was warm, familiar, faintly amused. "You've gone quiet again," she said. "Peace doesn't make headlines," I replied. She laughed. "The world's still talking about your speech. You know, they're planning a global summit next year. The organizers want you to chair it." I sighed. "Chair it?" "Maya, I can't even sit through a 2-hour meeting without wanting to dismantle the agenda." This isn't about structure, she said. It's about symbolism. They need you. Maybe that's the problem, I said softly. I've spent too many years being needed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently, then maybe it's time to want something instead. Shape. That night, I walked the shore alone. The wind was soft, carrying the faint scent of salt and lavender. The horizon shimmered like something infinite. Want something, she'd said. But I wasn't sure I knew how anymore. For years, purpose had replaced desire, discipline had replaced dreaming. I'd been so busy surviving, then guiding, that I'd forgotten how to simply live. Shape. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a printed photo, the original blueprints of the Tide House, now part of a museum exhibit in New York. Beneath it, a note in Naomi's handwriting. The world's still building from your lines. But it's time for you to draw something new. I traced the lines of the blueprint with my fingertips. They felt familiar, steady, deliberate, certain. The same lines that had once saved me. But now, they belonged to history. Shape. Later that week, I met with the dean of the small college where I still taught. He smiled as I walked in. Ellis, he said, I heard about the award. Congratulations? Or should I say, Elena? I froze. He smiled kindly. Don't worry, your secret's safe. But it's time, isn't it? To stop hiding? I tilted my head. And do what exactly? Make peace performative again? He shook his head. No. Make it contagious. He handed me a folder, a proposal for a new department. The School of Ethical Design founding director, Elena Pierce. I stared at it, heart steady but uncertain. He said softly, it's not about recognition. It's about continuity. I smiled faintly. Continuity tends to find its own architects. Then let it find you, he said. Shape. That evening, I stood by the window as the rain began. Drops streaked down the glass like time refusing to stop moving. I thought about the offer. It was tempting not for power, but for purpose. To build a place where women like Aria, Juliet, and even a younger version of myself could learn without fear. But something in me resisted. Maybe because every structure I'd ever built had cost a piece of myself. And I wasn't sure I had any pieces left to give away. Shape. A week later, Daniel came to visit. He looked older now, softer around the edges, but still carrying that steady warmth I'd come to rely on. You look content, he said as we sat on the porch. I am, I said, but I'm not sure if it's contentment or quiet resignation. He smiled. There's a difference? There is, I said. Contentment means arrival. Resignation means surrender. I just don't know which one I've reached. He sipped his tea thoughtfully. Maybe neither. Maybe you're in the space between. I smiled. You make it sound like design. It is, he said. Every ending has negative space. You just have to decide whether to leave it empty or fill it. Shape. The next morning, I went back to my desk. I opened a blank sheet of paper and drew the first line I'd drawn in years. It wasn't a building this time. It was a path winding, open-ended, leading nowhere specific. Freedom, visualized. Then, beside it, I wrote 3 words. Live without proof. It was the only design brief I'd ever written for myself. Shape. A few days later, I sent a letter to Naomi. Don't name the next project after me. Don't preserve my office or archive my notes. Just keep building. And tell the world that the woman who started it left to go live in it. I sealed it, dropped it in the post, and felt something inside me finally exhale. Shape. That evening, Daniel joined me on the shore again. The sunset was fire and gold, the ocean restless but kind. What did you decide? He asked. I decided not to decide, I said. He smiled. That sounds like peace to me. I nodded. No more titles, no more blueprints, just days that belonged to no one but me. Shape. We stood there as the tide crept higher, waves brushing against our shoes. I used to think peace was the end of motion, I said. But it isn't. It's just movement without fear. Daniel took my hand. And where are you moving now? Home, I said. Wherever that turns out to be. Shape. As night fell, the sky turned indigo. The stars like scattered sketches across a black canvas. I looked out at the horizon, the eternal intersection of past and future. And I whispered to it one last time, you don't have to build forever to be remembered. You just have to build once right. The wind caught the words, carrying them across the dark water. They didn't echo. They just became part of the sea. Shape. It has been 3 years since I left the Tide House. No one knows where I live now, and that's how I prefer it. The world kept building, just as I hoped it would. Naomi sends updates sometimes, though she tries to respect my silence. Juliet's Ledger project became an independent foundation. Maya hosts lectures about emotional architecture, always crediting me as the invisible blueprint. And Aria? She's designing schools in coastal cities across Africa, teaching students that the most ethical designs are the ones that make room for humanity. I see their names in articles, their faces in magazines. Each time, I smile and turn the page. My work has become untraceable, and that, finally, feels like freedom. Shape. My cottage sits near the edge of a quiet village in southern Portugal. It's a small white house, with ivy climbing the walls, and a view of the sea so wide, it makes language seem unnecessary. I spend my mornings painting instead of drafting, my afternoons walking the cliffs, and my evenings still listening to the ocean. It never stops speaking, but now, it no longer sounds like memory. It sounds like time, flowing without demand. Shape. Sometimes, tourists wander by and ask if the house is available to rent. I always tell them no, not unkindly, just gently. It's not for rent, it's for rest. The locals know me only as Elena da Costa, a foreign widow who tends the garden and sells small watercolor postcards at the weekend market. They think I'm ordinary, and I love that. No one expects me to be extraordinary anymore. Shape. One morning, as I painted the horizon, a child stopped near my easel. He was maybe 7, curious and barefoot. Is that the ocean? He asked in Portuguese accented English. It's my version of it, I said. He frowned. It looks different than it does in real life. I smiled. That's because I'm not painting what I see. I'm painting what I remember. He thought about that for a long moment, then nodded like he understood something important. Children often do. Before he left, he looked at my signature in the corner of the canvas, just an E. What does the E stand for? He asked. Everything, I said. He grinned, then ran off toward the beach, leaving tiny footprints in the sand. Shape. That night, I sat by the window, candlelight flickering against the glass. I thought about the girl. I used to be the one who once stood trembling on another coastline, clutching betrayal like evidence. She wouldn't recognize me now. And that's good. Because I didn't survive her story to keep reliving it. I survived it to outgrow it. Shape. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No name on the envelope, just a return stamp from New York. Inside was a printed article titled, Legacy in Silence: The Unseen Woman Who Changed Modern Architecture. The subheading made me laugh softly. It began, no one knows where she is, but everyone knows what she built. The Tide House has inspired more than 50 projects worldwide. The woman once known for scandal became the architect of renewal, then disappeared. Perhaps that's the point. The final line caught me. Her revenge was never about ruin. It was about reinvention. I folded the article carefully and placed it inside the Echoes box. Then I took the box outside, dug a small hole near the garden, and buried it under the olive tree, not to hide it, but to let it rest. Shape. Days blurred gently into seasons. Spring brought wildflowers. Summer brought laughter from the village. Autumn brought silence. And in that silence, I found my truest rhythm. I began writing again, not essays or speeches, just thoughts. Fragments. Letters never sent. One of them read, Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a hallway you keep sweeping clean. Another said, You know you've healed when the story becomes a lesson instead of a wound. I never intended to publish them. But maybe one day, someone will find them, after I'm gone, and see that the blueprint extended all the way to peace. Shape. One evening, as the sun dipped into the Atlantic, Daniel appeared. He looked older now, silver in his hair, but his smile was unchanged. I thought you'd retired from visitors, he said. I thought you'd retired from persistence, I replied. He laughed. You know me better than that. We sat outside, watching the water turn gold. He held out a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He grinned. "A deed." I raised a brow. "You bought another building?" "No," he said. "I bought a plot of land near Lisbon. I thought maybe we'd build something small, together." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't offering ambition. He was offering belonging. After a long silence, I said, "No blueprints." He smiled. "No blueprints. Just foundations. Shape we didn't build immediately. Instead, we started with the garden rows of herbs, then lavender, then olive trees. It wasn't architecture. It was life, planted by hand. Sometimes we argued over details, the angle of sunlight, the shape of the path. But they were gentle arguments, born from care, not control. I realized then that even love, when redesigned, could be ethical. It didn't demand. It invited. Shape years passed quietly. People stopped asking questions about the past. Even the media, eventually, found new obsessions. And that, perhaps, was the sweetest justice of all, to be forgotten by those who once defined you. Shape one last entry in my journal reads, "If revenge was the fire that forged me, peace was the sea that cooled me. The house that began in betrayal became a refuge for the broken. And the woman who once sought control learned how to surrender." Shape, sometimes. I still dream of that first night, the shock, the betrayal, the unbearable silence that followed. But now, when I wake, I don't feel the ache. I feel gratitude, because without that night, there would be no garden, no freedom, no life reclaimed. The past didn't break me. It drafted me. And I turned out better than the original design. Shape. As I write this, the ocean hums in the distance, soft, endless, forgiving. Tomorrow, I'll finish a new painting. A beach house standing strong against the tide. Its windows wide open. Its foundation unshakable. I won't title it. But if I did, it would read, "Built from the Storm." I think Andrew would have hated it. And that makes me smile. Shape. When the sun sets, I close my notebook and whisper to the air, "It's done." Not as surrender, but as arrival. And as the waves fold over themselves, erasing footprints and beginnings alike, I finally understand, peace doesn't mean you forget the fire. It means you learned how to hold the warmth without burning anymore. Shape cinematic logline. When a woman discovers her husband has been hiding his mistress in their shared beach house, she doesn't explode, she evolves. What begins as humiliation becomes a masterclass in poetic justice. As she turns the very property that symbolized betrayal into a sanctuary for others, like her, proving that the sharpest revenge is rebuilding a life so strong it becomes untouchable. House a refuge for women rebuilding their lives.